Chapter 1658. Qin Yu was the first to step into the great tide of spiritual strength. His figure paused for a moment before he stood still. A faint red and orange light covered his body. Tonight, with his 5 colors suppressing everyone, even Yang Fanshan's brilliant 4 colors had become dim and dim. Qin Yu's 2 colors were like fireflies, completely unremarkable. He paused for a moment and then stepped into the Jade Gate Pass. Little Meaty followed behind. Her performance was slightly better, but she only had 3 colors. However, very few people discovered that the moment she stepped into the pass, she looked up. This glance caused a certain restless existence to fall into complete silence. It curled up into a ball and shivered, not daring to move at all. Baiji was the third to step in. 4 colors. This scene caused strange expressions to appear on the faces of the people outside the Jade Gate Pass who had yet to enter. The master and servant trio had entered, but the performance of the 2 masters was far inferior to that of a single maid. This could be called a rare situation. At the Great Pine Pavilion, looking at the Jade Gate Pass from afar, the people present all had strange expressions. The view here was excellent. There was plenty of light near the gate, and in addition to the outstanding eyesight of cultivators, everything could be seen. The master and servant trio had entered one after the other. They had high expectations, but now they were even more disappointed. For a maid to be able to follow such a great figure, it was natural that she wasn't ordinary. It was also natural for her to erupt with 4 colors. But that great figure, called Qin, Yu only had 2 colors. Even the woman who had reprimanded Yang, Qianren, only had 3 colors. Could it be that the descendant of a great family had gone out to explore the Western Desolate? Was this why there was such a great disparity in performance between master and servant? But that wasn't right. With Eastern Commander Yang Wudi's status and strength, what second generation could make Yang Qianren feel such fear? Or could it be that this Yang family young master had made a mistake and recognized the wrong person? Although this was the least likely possibility, everyone was looking forward to it the most. Because if this was true, then there really would be a great show to watch. Jiang Jiue suddenly said, "Auntie, have you heard of the fish dragon white robe?" Auntie Jiang's eyes brightened. The actions of great figures are indeed reasonable. Perhaps they have some other mission in entering the Central Desolate, so they deliberately hid their identities after coming to our East Pole County City. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, it is reasonable for us to conceal ourselves. She glanced at the crowd and said in an indifferent tone, "As for us, since we accidentally saw something, we should keep our mouths shut to avoid the disaster comes from the mouth." Everyone's expression changed slightly, and their hearts trembled. At this moment, within the Jade Gate Pass, Great Qin's Tiger General Zhao Yuan, who was in charge of guarding the pass, frowned slightly. He put down the wine cup in his hand, stood up, and took a step forward. Ignoring the restrictive spells within the pass, he tore through space and arrived at a forbidden area. The cultivators serving here were already in chaos. Seeing the great general arrive, they hurriedly bowed. "Greetings, great general." Zhao Yuan was expressionless. What happened? An azure-robed cultivator walked out from the crowd in front of him and bowed. Grand General, the heaven-peaking insect was suddenly startled just now. It retracted all its tentacles and fell into great panic. Zhao Yuan frowned. Why, the indigo-robed cultivator broke out in a cold sweat. "We have not found out yet." Zhao Yuan looked at him coldly. "Hurry up and investigate. If you can't give me an explanation, what is the point of keeping you around?" The faces of the people on the other side turned pale. They bowed and hurriedly left. Normally speaking, these people came from large sects and weren't from the army. At most, they were only cooperating with the Qin Empire and didn't need to fear the great general. But the person in front of them was different. He was a direct descendant of the Zhao family, one of the 5 great general clans of the Qin Empire. He was known to be the most ruthless and ruthless person. Over the years, he had personally killed at least 100 cultivators from various sections. Among them were even disciples of the upper 4 sections. But he still remained in the Jade Gate Pass, not causing any trouble. How could he not be afraid? Inside the Jade Gate Pass, there was another world. Standing at the peak of the East Pole Mountain, one could only see a small city from afar. It wasn't even half the size of the East Pole County city. But when one truly entered, they discovered that the sky was high and the earth was vast. Everything within 1,000 or even 10,000 miles was within the Jade Gate Pass. Taking a deep breath, heaven and earth spirit energy was as thick as water. It poured into their bodies and was instantly refined and absorbed, becoming a part of their strength. It felt like a fish that had lived in a shallow puddle had jumped into a deep lake. Only then did they realize how easy it was to breathe and how vast the world was. Qin Yu finally understood why Little Meat wanted him to come to the Central Wasteland Divine Continent. It wasn't just for that matter. In terms of cultivation environment alone, the Central Wasteland Divine Continent was an important foundation for him to ascend to the Emperor realm within 30 years. And now, the entrance wasn't quiet. Many people had gathered here, divided into small circles. The cultivators who had passed the Jade Gate Pass and performed outstandingly were surrounded by many people. There were close to 100 people in the largest group, and the one who was surrounded was actually the black-clothed girl who was embellished with 5 different colors and even specks of blue light. Even though she had turned down Golden Toad Palace and Green River Lake's recruitment, that didn't mean others didn't have a chance. As the saying goes, a fine jade is right in front of you. Even if there's a chance, you have to fight for it with all your might. If you succeed, it would be a great merit. As for that scholarly robed young man, he was no longer here. Qin, you could faintly see his fading back at the end of the street. A white-haired scholar with fluttering long sleeves was leading the way. The Confucian-robed young man respectfully followed behind with his head lowered. This was an agreement. Once he entered the Central Wasteland Divine Continent, he would be led away. It seemed that this young man would have great achievements in the future. The scholar seemed to sense something and looked back at the entrance. It seemed that his eyes weren't too good from reading all year round. He squinted his eyes, but still couldn't see the figure clearly. This caused the scholar to hesitate. He thought for a moment, shook his head, and continued forward. Since he couldn't see clearly, it meant that the time wasn't right. There was no need to look any more. The Confucian-robed young man said, "Teacher, what are you looking at?" The white-haired scholar smiled. "An interesting little fellow. I should say very interesting." The Confucian-robed young man said, "Fate with the Academy?" The white-haired scholar nodded. "There is some fate, but the time hasn't come yet." After speaking, he paused. "Mausoleum of Zhou, when you enter the Academy in the future, you must learn to appreciate the word fate. This is the most essential aspect of our Academy. In the future, when you travel the Central Wasteland, you will suffer less. Otherwise, I fear it will be difficult for you to pass through that road of study." Mausoleum of Zhou respectfully bowed. "Yes, teacher." One in front, one behind, the 2 scholars walked away. Qin Yu looked away. The white-haired scholar turned his head. When their gazes met, Qin Yu was aware of something. With just a thought, he covered it up. In such a hurry, it was better to avoid trouble. Since they had just entered the Central Wasteland, this was fate. Then, they would naturally meet again in the future. "Let's go. What is there to see?" A chubby figure appeared at Qin Yu's side. She looked up at the skies, her complexion not too good. Qin Yu didn't know what was wrong with her. Following the principle that it was better to avoid trouble, he simply nodded. "I'll do whatever you say." But he still couldn't smoothly leave. 2-colored or 3-colored wasn't worth mentioning and wouldn't be able to arouse the attention of the people of the Central Wasteland Divine Continent. But 4-colored, that was enough. Several figures blocked the way. Their eyes fell on Baiji. A Taoist, carrying a long sword on his back, bowed. "Fellow Taoist, are you willing to enter my limitless temple to cultivate? Although my status in the temple is low, I can accept a disciple on behalf of teacher. As long as you nod and agree, you will be a fourth-generation direct disciple of my limitless temple." The complexions of several people changed. They glanced at the old Taoist carrying a sword and thought that no one would dare to pretend to be someone from the limitless temple, especially a fourth-generation disciple. They couldn't help but feel helpless. They had managed to find a good seedling with great difficulty, but she was actually fancied by someone from the limitless temple. How could they compete for her? Baiji furrowed her eyebrows, not speaking. The old Taoist had a sincere expression. He slowly said, "There is no need for you to have any scruples. You only need to nod or shake your head. Since I have appeared here, I will naturally help you remove all worries." As he spoke, he swept his eyes over Chinyu and little Meaty. Luckily, there was no arrogance or threat in his eyes. Otherwise, Chinyu felt that this old Taoist, who had lived for countless years, would have died today. Baiji shook her head. The old Taoist revealed an anxious expression. He took a step forwards. "You can consider it for several more days. There is no need to hurry and reply. I will be in Jade Gate past these days. If you change your mind, you can come find me at Immortal Seeking Tower at any time." After he finished speaking, he waved his hand. Without giving Baiji a chance to continue speaking, he turned and left. From the looks of it, it seemed that he feared he would be thoroughly rejected, so he left some hope for Chinyu. Because of this old Taoist, Chinyu's prejudice against the cultivators of the central wasteland suddenly lessened by a great deal. After the old Taoist left, the others glanced at each other in dismay, thinking that since they had already come, they all reported their names. Luckily, with the precedent set by the Limitless Temple, they didn't have any extravagant hopes of obtaining anything. They all expressed that Baiji could consider it and make a decision in the future. They all left behind their addresses and left. Meaty stepped forwards, and Chinyu followed behind. Before this, when facing the old Taoist and the others, Baiji had been expressionless. But now, a trace of panic appeared in her eyes. She quickly chased after them and whispered, "Madam, I absolutely didn't have any thoughts towards you." Meaty coldly sneered, "What does it have to do with me?" Baiji no longer spoke. She lowered her head. Chinyu coughed. "I actually think that old Taoist isn't bad." Meaty chuckled. She glanced at Chinyu. "You think he's good, but what a pity. From start to finish, he didn't even glance at you." Although this was indeed the case with Meaty's words, why did it feel like the situation had changed? Besides leaving people in suspense, when it came to insulting others, Meaty might even be able to compete for a ranking in the world. Chinyu shut his mouth, not speaking. It was clear that she was in a terrible mood right now, and yet she still wanted to look for trouble. Did she have a hole in her head? This little girl Baiji, she had learned to be smart. The master and servant trio left the pass. They didn't care which direction they were heading in, and simply left aimlessly. Not long after they left, Yang Fanshan hurried over. He stood at the pass and looked around, his complexion gradually turning pale. The skinny old man with a goatee looked at the woman across from him. He frowned, puzzlement in his eyes. He also couldn't understand. This woman had always been considered smart. So why was she acting so crazily this time? The woman's skin was dark and her appearance was average, but her figure was actually quite heavy. She lowered her head in silence. As for the goatee looking at her and Yang Fanshan's dark and gloomy expression, she pretended not to notice. Since she had done it, there was no turning back. In fact, for many years ago, she had never been able to turn back. After waiting for a long time, he still didn't find the master and servant trio. Yang Fanshan took a deep breath and turned to leave. The goatee old man turned and followed. The woman fell behind. "You stay here and don't follow me. Otherwise, I'm worried that if I fall asleep one night, my head will be separated from my body." the woman really did stop. After a moment of hesitation, she bowed and left. Chapter 1659. The reason Yang Fanshan had entered first was to wait here so that he wouldn't be separated from the master and servants. He had a favor to ask of them, so he had to be careful. As for why he didn't say anything before, it was because only here could he show them his sincerity. But he never imagined that this taciturn woman would suddenly stir up trouble. Although it wasn't serious, it was enough to delay them for a moment. Thus the scene before them occurred. Let alone saying that it was a coincidence or that she was innocent, no one would believe it. As for the woman, she didn't hold any hope that this would happen. What was done was done. The goateed old man sighed inwardly. He wasn't willing to meddle in the internal affairs of the Yang family, as an exalted one had to have the attitude of an exalted one. One had to do what they were doing and not care about anything else. For instance, this woman had suddenly attacked today, ruining Yang Fanshan's chance to turn things around. But what about the truth? Who knew what the future would be like? Even if everything went smoothly and Yang Fanshan really died, the ones who died were still the Yang family members. As for the woman that participated in this matter, would she have a good ending? The goateed old man glanced at Yang Fanshan walking in front. He had a fairly good impression of him. But what a pity he had taken a momentary stroke of luck and wasn't able to fully grasp it. Just how difficult would it be to obtain it again? He feared things didn't bode well for him. Outside the door, Yang Fanshan wasn't there. This was beyond Qin Yu's expectations. But he was only a little surprised. He glanced at little Meaty's calm and gloomy expression and then ignored her. As he followed behind her, his eyes were half closed. The majority of his mind was already focused on cultivating. In such an environment, if he didn't hurry up and cultivate, it would be a waste of heavenly treasures. After walking for a while, Qin Yu endured it again and again. In the end, he opened his eyes and said, "Where are we going?" She said she was tired, so couldn't she hurry up and find a place to rest? He wanted to go into seclusion and cultivate right now. Little Meaty humphed. "What are you in such a hurry for? We're just up ahead." Luckily, it really was in front of them. After turning a corner, a restaurant by the side of the road appeared in front of him. The words "Immortal Inquiry Tower" hung on the signboard. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was grand and majestic. These 3 words were like 3 huge mountains. When he looked at them, they towered into the clouds. When he looked up, he couldn't see their heads. Qin Yu's lips twitched. Was there a need to be in such a hurry? But of course, he didn't dare to say this out loud. But it turned out that even thinking about it wasn't safe. Little Meaty turned and narrowed her eyes at him. "Qin Yu, do you want to die?" Qin Yu waved his hand again and again, forcefully shaking his head. He used his sincere eyes to express that he really hadn't lived long enough. Little Meaty clenched her teeth. The current Qin Yu was becoming increasingly thick-skinned. She felt as if he were a slippery loach. He had to find a chance to make him remember, lest he forgot who the creditor was. The Immortal Seeking Tower was extremely famous. Everyone in the East Pole County knew about it. The god's nectar in the building was even more acclaimed as a sacred wine, a fine wine that people on this path absolutely could not miss. As it turned out, fame and price were also directly proportional. Luckily, before he left the East Pole County city, he had received compensation from Shiyu's store. Spending someone else's money to drink the god's nectar was naturally much better. The 2 of them sat down again. Baiji stood at the side. Qin Yu asked her to sit down as well, so as not to draw too much attention. She shook her head. Little Meaty didn't say anything, so Qin Yu didn't insist. Dish without mentioning lust. 2 jugs of God's nectar were delivered. Qin Yu opened one and smelled it. His eyes brightened. It wasn't difficult to live up to its great reputation. At the very least, the fragrance of the wine was truly overflowing. Moreover, it vaguely gave him a familiar feeling. He poured a bowl of wine. The wine was clear and sweet. After drinking 2 mouthfuls, Qin Yu frowned and looked at Little Meaty. She had only opened the jug and smelled it. She hadn't poured the wine at all. She met Qin Yu's gaze and lightly said, "You only have the appearance, but not the true essence. The current god's nectar is nothing more than a name." Qin Yu thought deeply, but before he could nod, someone beside him said unhappily, "Miss, your tone is quite big. Immortal Inquiring Tower's god's nectar has been sold in every region of the Central Desolate for thousands of years, but no one has ever given it such an evaluation. I wonder what kind of wine Miss has drunk to dare speak like this." The one who sneered was a blue-clothed swordsman. His face was flushed red and his eyes were blurry. It was clear he had drunk a great deal. Now that he was leaning over, his eyes were extremely sharp, like two invisible swords, causing the air to suddenly become a bit colder. The commotion in the restaurant instantly quieted down. Many eyes gathered on him. As the first choice of Jade Gate Pass's patrons, it was natural for powerhouses to appear here. But among these powerhouses, this blue-clothed swordsman was one of the most difficult to deal with. This person's name was Wei Han. His current status was a sword cultivator under Great General Zhao Yuan's command. It was said that he used to be part of a great sword sect, but because he had provoked a calamity, he had been expelled from his sect and ended up in his current situation. His swordsmanship was extremely high. Wei Han was addicted to drinking. Most of the money he received from the army every month ended up in this immortal inquiring restaurant. He had to borrow money from time to barely appease the alcoholic bug in his stomach. And the god's nectar was his favorite drink. If he didn't drink a pot of it every day, he would feel uncomfortable all over. Therefore, when he was drunk today, he had spoken up after hearing Xiao Rou's words. He truly couldn't tolerate such a fine wine in the world being looked down upon by a woman. Little Rou glanced at the disheveled sword cultivator and calmly said, "Since I said this wine isn't worth mentioning, I am naturally speaking the truth." Wei Han supported himself on the table and stood up. He sneered, "Then today I will uphold the god's nectar's reputation. Since you say it isn't worth mentioning, then bring out an even better wine to convince this way. Otherwise, I will unsheath my sword today and leave behind several genes of mist-blood as a warning to future generations." The master and servant trio remained calm. Even though there was an invisible sword intent circulating around their bodies, their expressions didn't change. No matter how strong a sovereign realm sword cultivator was, how could he touch the master and servant trio in the slightest? The onlookers weren't afraid of things getting out of hand. This was especially true after they drank some wine, so the situation became even more intense. Someone shouted. Sword Immortal Wei was truly heroic. He was willing to offer a sword to a woman for the wine in his cup. He was truly a romantic wine lover. Someone shouted, "Little miss, don't be so arrogant. If you have the ability, then bring out some good wine and peel off Great Sword Immortal Wei's face in front of everyone. Let him see what it meant that there was always someone better than the heavens, and there was wine above wine." The crowd was bubbling with noise and excitement. Qin Yu's eyebrows rose up. He swept his eyes around, thinking that the central desolate realm of gods was truly filled with outstanding people. There were more people here who didn't fear death than elsewhere. But what was little Rou doing today? It was just a mouthful of wine. Was it worth fighting over? He couldn't figure it out. He felt that little Rou's recent actions were becoming increasingly difficult to fathom. Could it be that after the crack in the world shattered, she was no longer the same as before? She was becoming more and more like a real woman? If this was the case, then there was an explanation. Little Rou glanced at Qin Yu. Her eyes clearly showed that he was about to die. Qin Yu hurriedly lowered his head and drank. This god's nectar only had its appearance, but it wasn't bad. He could at least drink it. Wei Han laughed. The person at the same table as you is constantly drinking, but this little girl dares to spout such nonsense. She really doesn't know the immensity of the heavens and earth. As Qin Yu heard this, he couldn't help but put down his wine cup. He looked at him and said, "Sword Immortal, Do you know how big the world is? Wei Han's eyebrows rose up. Of course it's big. Then has Sword Immortal ever walked through it? Of course not. Wei Han revealed a mocking smile. Then, are you going to say that since you have never walked through the world, how do you know how high the heavens are and how deep the world is? Qin Yu nodded. That's right. He pointed at the wine cup. I won't mention anything else, but just from this cup alone, it seems to me that you are a frog at the bottom of a well. The reason I drank a few more mouthfuls is because I spent money to buy this wine and it is very expensive. It isn't because it tastes good. Wei Han clapped his hands. Very good. Then let's not argue. Show me the evidence, and I will immediately apologize. Kowtow and apologize. Wei Han's eyes narrowed. He raised his hand and drank a mouthful of wine. For the sake of immortal brew, so what if I have to kneel? Perhaps it will be a story to be told in the future. But tonight, if the two of you cannot produce the evidence, then don't leave. Everyone was delighted to see the conflict escalate. They couldn't help but look at Ruru with admiration. They thought to themselves that this girl really deserved to die. In addition, her expression didn't change at all. It seemed that she was very confident. TSK, I knew it. She came from a rich and powerful family. Did she really think that she could do whatever she wanted just because of the prestige of her ancestors? Don't forget this was Jade Gate Pass, and the Grand General Zhao Yuan who guarded the pass was the person who cared the least about these things in this world. Were the disciples of the four upper sects amazing? Then their background could truly be said to be heaven-defying in the central, desolate, divine continent. Even if they couldn't do as they pleased, they could at least walk 7.5. But what were the consequences of causing trouble in our Jade Gate Pass? All of them were beheaded, their souls shattered, and their bodies and souls destroyed. They didn't even have the chance to reincarnate. What were the consequences? Nothing at all. Jade Gate Pass was still Jade Gate Pass, and Grand General Zhao Yuan was still that son of a bitch. He was still alive and kicking. This little girl didn't cover her mouth. She feared that she would suffer a great loss at Jade Gate Pass this time. To have Wei Han kneel, this had really touched his reverse scale. Even if this matter reached Zhao Yuan's ears, with the Grand General's protective nature, he wouldn't be able to obtain any good results. From the very beginning, no one believed that Ruru and Qin Yu were speaking the truth. Could there be wine in this world that was better than God's nectar? Moreover, it was in a place outside of our central, desolate, divine continent. It was clearly impossible. The manager of Immortal Seeking Tower's Jade Gate Pass bitterly smiled as he came out to mediate. He first respectfully bowed to Wei Han. Sword Immortal Wei, when Immortal Seeking Tower opens its doors to do business, what it fears the most is being embroiled in these conflicts and stirring up trouble. I wonder if you can give me face and let today's matter rest? As long as Sword Immortal Wei agrees, the debt you owe us last month will be written off. There was another uproar as everyone laughed and scolded the manager for delaying them from watching a good show. Some people even threatened that if the manager continued to spoil the mood, they wouldn't buy any more wine. The manager pretended not to hear them. A bunch of drunkards, young and old, were guarding the gods' nectar card, so how could they not be restrained? If they had the ability, then don't come and drink. Chapter 1660. Wei Han smiled faintly as he rapped the table. Manager Liu, it's not that I don't want to give you face, but didn't you hear that the girl opposite me clearly wants me to kowtow and apologize? This matter is not something that can be resolved with a month or two's worth of wine. It's best you watch from the side. Don't worry. No matter how big today's matter becomes, I, Wei Han, will bear the responsibility. I will not implicate your Immortal Seeking Tower. I'm already very sincere. Treat me as a friend, so just sit down and watch. Sword Immortal Wei is awesome. To be able to shirk a month's worth of wine. You are truly impressive. It looks like something big is going to happen today. Quickly call someone over to watch the show. Wei Han cursed. All of you scram. I'm not an actor on stage for you to fool around with." At that moment, his expression changed. He put down his wine bowl and cupped his hands. "Uncle Master, why are you here?" The old Taoist walked over with a sword on his back. He stood by the table with a calm expression. When he heard Wei Han's greeting, the ruckus immediately quietened down. "Wei Han, if you still remember, you should call me Uncle Master. Let's forget about today's matter." Wei Han smiled wryly. The old Taoist glared. "What? You still dare raise conditions? Do you want me to sell the sword on my back to pay for your wine?" When manager Lu heard this, he immediately stood up and cupped his hands. "Taoist Chin, you speak too seriously. As long as Sword Immortal Wei is willing to let this matter rest, my words are still valid." The old Taoist smiled and nodded. "Manager Lu is very sensible. I thank you." He glared at Wei Han. "Hurry up and get off the stage. Do you want me to kneel down and beg you?" Wei Han's expression turned even more bitter. "Uncle Master, how can I not agree to your request? But you have to give me a reason." The old Taoist's gaze landed on Baiji. Wei Han looked at her and nodded with a sigh. "Forget it. If that's the case, Uncle Master, please get this lady to take back her words and pretend nothing happened." The old Taoist grunted. "At least you know what's good for you." Inside the immortal-seeking tower, everyone cursed inwardly. Where did this old Taoist come from? He deserved to be hacked to pieces. Of course, he didn't dare to say it out loud. He just muttered it in his heart. The old Taoist seemed to sense something. He smiled and cupped his hands together. "Infinite Temple, I am Qin. I have disturbed everyone's mood today. My apologies, my apologies." As soon as the name Limitless Temple came out, everyone's expression changed. How could they dare to have any objections? They all put on smiling faces and said that the old immortal was kind-hearted. They admired him greatly and did not dare to be disrespectful. This made the smile on the old Taoist's face even brighter. However, when his eyes fell on Baiji's face, his heart skipped a beat. This girl actually didn't seem to notice anything at all. Could it be that you haven't discovered the fame and status of our immeasurable temple? When they parted at the gate, the old Taoist was full of worries. When he returned to his residence, he felt uneasy. He sighed for a long time and was about to drown his sorrows in alcohol when he saw this little girl again. Surprised and delighted, he immediately intervened and did not hesitate to reveal his identity in front of everyone, forcing Wei Han to lower his head and drink the water. He originally thought that the little girl had changed her mind, but looking at her now, that didn't seem to be the case. But since things had come to this point, he had to try again. The old Taoist braced himself and calmly walked over to the table of the master and servant. "I take back what I said before. This matter will end here. In the future, when you travel the world, think carefully before you speak to avoid stirring up trouble." He turned his head and his eyes fell on Baiji. He squeezed out a smile. "Fellow Taoist, have you thought it over? Our Limitless Temple's doors have always been open to you." Whoosh! Everyone was in an uproar. After all this time, this old immortal had come to accept a disciple. No wonder he had interfered. Today's matter, they secretly rejoiced that they hadn't been muddle-headed before. Otherwise, if they had ruined the old Taoist plan to accept a disciple, that would be the same as destroying someone's great Tao inheritance. This was a great enmity in the cultivation world. A disciple of the Limitless Temple. Everyone's eyes gathered, filled with envy and jealousy. There was also a bit of shock and disbelief. They thought that this wasn't right. The cultivation potential that the Limitless Temple had taken a liking to was actually a maid. Baiji shook her head. She was straightforward and efficient, without any hesitation. Thus, in the blink of an eye, everyone's shocked and envious expressions turned into broken eyeballs and broken jaws. The old Taoist could feel the determination in Baiji's eyes. He was immediately heartbroken. He suddenly felt that he really couldn't accept this disciple for his teacher. The more he thought about it, the more his heart ached and his complexion paled. The old Taoist's lips trembled. He said, "You won't reconsider?" "Just like I said before, I can wait for you for several days. If you think it's too short, I can wait for several years. As long as you are willing to consider it, I will live in this immortal-seeking tower and wait for you to come back." Everyone glanced at each other in dismay. Since when did the Limitless Temple accept a disciple like this? Moreover, from her tone, this little maid had already refused twice. She really didn't know what was good for her. "Old Immortal, look at us. If you think it's too troublesome, then look at me. My talent is good, and I'm willing. As long as you give me a look, I will immediately kneel down and call you master." No, even calling him grandmaster is fine. Wei Han couldn't help but frown. His gaze fell on the master and servants. The drunkenness on his face faded a bit, but there was a chill in his eyes. Baiji hesitated for a moment. Then she slowly said, "You don't need to say anything. In this life, I will only follow by my wife's side. I will not join any other faction." The old Taoist's body trembled. He took a deep breath. "So it's like this. In this world, everyone has their own paths. If you choose one and don't make any mistakes, you will eventually be able to walk a path to the heavens. Not coming to our limitless temple isn't necessarily a mistake. In the future, when your sword cultivation reaches a critical juncture, if you have any questions or need help breaking through, you can come to me. Limitless Temple will definitely help you." Baiji pursed her lips and nodded. She truly felt that this old Taoist in front of her was a good person. Moreover, she had a very favorable impression of his swordsmanship and felt close to him. But compared to his wife, none of this was worth it. Thus, Baiji's words just now came from the bottom of her heart. There was no falsehood in them. The old Taoist smiled and nodded. That's good, that's good." He turned and was about to leave when Meaty suddenly said, "Taoist, what you said just now wasn't wrong. There are countless paths beneath our feet. So it doesn't matter which one you choose, after all. Ascending to the heavens is difficult. There are trillions of lives in this world, so how many people can accomplish this? But if they are all paths that lead to death, then no matter which one you choose, it isn't wrong." The old Taoist frowned. He felt that these words didn't conform with his own sect's teachings. But he glanced at Baiji and nodded. Meaty glared at Chinyu. She coughed and cupped her hands together. "Old Immortal, please don't lower yourself to my level. After personally experiencing Senior's words and actions today, this Junior is filled with admiration. This is a wine fruit that I plucked from an unknown tree. I hope that Senior will accept it." The old Taoist glanced at Wei Han and then at the wine fruit in Chinyu's hands. He thought for a moment and nodded. "Then I won't be polite." Chinyu smiled and extended his hands. Meaty had already stood up. The master and servant trio walked out. Wei Han wanted to speak, but was stopped by the old Taoist's eyes. He looked down at his hands, a dignified look in his eyes. The master and servant went downstairs, left the building, and walked far away. Wei Han coughed lightly. "Uncle Master, although it's for you. In any case, I'm the one who lost face. Ahem, as the saying goes, those who see it have a share." The old Taoist sneered and turned to leave. Wei Han smiled bitterly. Boos immediately sounded in the restaurant, causing Sword Immortal Wei to scold him in a joking manner. Feces and farts flew everywhere. Shopkeeper Liu had a pensive look on his face as he watched the old Taoist leave. Smiling, he excused himself and left alone. A moment later, outside the old Taoist residence, Wei Han frowned and looked at the smiling shopkeeper. His eyes were filled with ill intent. "Shopkeeper Liu, you're not a good friend. Why did you come with me?" Manager Liu's smile remained unchanged. "What are you saying, Sword Immortal Wei? This is the inn behind my restaurant. As a manager, where can I go? What's more, old Taoist Elder Chin is an honored guest of my immortal-seeking tower. Today he has suffered a disturbance, so I personally came to apologize. This is etiquette." Wei Han sneered. At this moment, the courtyard door opened from the inside. The old Taoist was expressionless. "If I don't open the door, are you two going to quarrel here until dawn?" Wei Han hurriedly shook his head. Shopkeeper Lu smiled, not speaking. Two expressions, one attitude. The old Taoist felt a headache coming on. He humphed twice and flicked his sleeves before walking away. Wei Han hurriedly chased after him. Shopkeeper Lu was the last. He wasn't in a hurry and casually closed the courtyard door. In the room, the old Taoist turned and sat down. On the table in front of him was the wine fruit that Qin Yu had gifted him. The moment this object fell into his hand, he could feel how extraordinary it was. He brought it back to his room and carefully tasted it, becoming more and more aware of its flavor. The reason he had Wei Han come was indeed because he was involved in this matter. The reason he was able to obtain the wine fruit was all because of him. As for this immortal-seeking tower's shopkeeper Lu, he was truly worthy of being a drunkard. His nose was sharp and fierce. In his territory, it was very difficult to not give himself away, since he had been targeted, and in addition to the fact that he had tactfully gifted him a great deal of God's nectar, he decided to turn a blind eye to it. Of course, this wasn't the only reason. Just based on what was on the table, it wasn't enough for shopkeeper Lu to enter this courtyard. Wei Han took the initiative to speak up. "Martial uncle, this fruit looks ordinary. Could it be that there is something else hidden within? How about we open it and take a look?" Shopkeeper Lu flipped his hand and took out a jade knife. In our immortal-seeking tower, there is a chef who uses a tool to cut immortal fruit plates. It is incomparably sharp, and because of its own characteristics, it doesn't stain the immortal fruit at all. It also doesn't damage the immortal fruit's rank or efficacy. The old Taoist waved his hand. Shopkeeper Lu's smile widened. He turned and handed over the jade knife. Although he took this object, he wouldn't personally do it. This was something he had some sense of propriety. Wei Han received it. He carefully drew a line across the wine fruit. Pa! The jade knife in his hand fell to the ground. It was a pity that this precious tool was extremely fragile to begin with, so it shattered on the spot. But now, even shopkeeper Lu wasn't in the mood to care about his own chef. His beloved object had been destroyed in a single day. His face flushed red and he looked intoxicated. "God's nectar! This is true God's nectar!" The old Taoist picked up the pieces of the wine fruit and looked down. His face was shaken and he sighed, thinking that this was indeed the case. A moment later, Wei Han and shopkeeper Lu bid their farewells and left, both of them remaining silent. When they parted, shopkeeper Lu took the initiative to say, "I will not speak of this matter to anyone else." Wei Han's lips twitched. "Wine bill," shopkeeper Lu said, completely waived. Wei Han cupped his hands across his chest and hurried away. Shopkeeper Lu let out a deep breath. He clenched a piece of the wine fruit's outer skin in his hand. What was an old debt with a drunkard? If he could obtain this fragment, then even if the price was 10 times or 100 times higher, it would still be worth it. Chapter 1661. The master and servant trio left Immortal-Seeking Tower. This time, they didn't go too far. Little Meaty casually pointed to an inn, and Baiji came forward to handle the necessary arrangements. She was still in a bad mood, but intuition told him that Little Meaty's gloomy mood had nothing to do with what was happening right now. She didn't even place Wei Han in her eyes. The root of the problem seemed to have appeared after she stepped into the Central Desolate. Could it be that she had recalled some unpleasant memories? After all, as long as he wasn't blind, he could see that there was some connection between Little Meaty and Immortal-Seeking Tower. Since she said that the current God's nectar is nothing more than a name, then she must have drunk the real God's nectar. Little details hid the greater truth. Qin Yu had long understood this truth. In particular, when it came to Little Meaty, each and every one of her actions had a deep meaning behind them. Qin Yu let out a long breath and gathered his thoughts. He closed his eyes and began to cultivate. Jade Gate Pass was extremely rich in heaven and earth's spiritual strength. It was truly a top cultivation, holy land. To waste even a single breath of time was shameful. But now there were several people who didn't have any thoughts of cultivating at all. They only felt their minds tumble in chaos. For instance, the young master of the Yang family who had fallen from the heavens. Even after driving away the woman next to him, Yang Fanshan was still depressed. He didn't have much trust in the Yang family, whether it was in East Pole City or the Eastern Border Army Commander's tent. As for this trip into the central desolate divine continent, he was filled with despair. In particular, when he saw a glimmer of hope, he turned around and threw it away. This made this despair even heavier. Now, there were two choices placed in front of Yang Qianfan. He could follow the prescribed order and fight for his life. If he could smoothly accomplish this, he could gain a firm foothold in the Yang family. Then, even if someone wanted to harm him in the future, he wouldn't be as helpless as he was now. But the chances of success were low. So low that Yang Fanshan couldn't help but think of the second choice, run away. The goateed man was an exalted of the Yang family. During this period of time, Qin Yu could faintly tell that he was a cautious person who had a sense of propriety. If he wholeheartedly wanted to escape, this old exalted man would likely try to stop him. But at most, he would only put on a show. It was true that Yang Fanshan's anger couldn't be quelled when he chased that woman away. But how could he not use this opportunity to reduce the difficulty of escaping in the future? But once he chose to flee, he would forever lose his status as a disciple of the Yang family. He was destined to be a wandering ghost in the central desolate. The second option had a high probability of survival, but it was because of his mother who had died of illness early in his life. He once knelt in front of the window and swore that he would return to the Yang family with dignity and move his mother's grave into the Yang family's ancestral land. The anxiety in his heart was evident. At the same time, the other person whose heart was in turmoil was Wei Han, the proud son of the sect in the past, who was now a sword cultivator who followed the army in dire straits, lay motionless on the bed with his eyes wide open. His body was silent, but thunder rumbled in his chest. He had never forgotten what had happened in the past. But what could he do if he didn't forget? With his natal sword broken, his sword Tao was broken, and he was destined to live a miserable life. He would follow great General Zhao Yuan and become a sword cultivator who fought with his life on the battlefield. He didn't know when he would lose his life and become a departed soul on the battlefield. But today, Wei Han's heart, that had been silent for a long time, that had nearly dried up, suddenly began to beat once more. It gave birth to some long-lost thoughts. Wei Han didn't know whether or not he could succeed. But if he didn't try, there really wouldn't be any chance. He took a deep breath and then exhaled. Sword cultivator Wei Han stood up and walked out. He had already fallen into the dust and was stuck in a quagmire. So what if he gave it a try? Even if he failed, at most he would lose a life. Then, not long after Wei Han left, he was stopped by the third sleepless person of the night. It was Immeasurable Temple's Taoist Chin. He looked at Wei Han, his expression calm. "What do you plan on doing?" Wei Han cupped his hands together. "Reporting to High Master. I have done many things in the army over the years. Kneeling down and begging for help isn't difficult for me." Taoist Chin nodded. "You are smart to not have any other thoughts. Otherwise, I would have killed you first to prevent any trouble for my immeasurable temple." Wei Han smiled bitterly. He thought that even if this old man really had such thoughts, there was no need for him to speak the truth. Couldn't he be a little more tactful? Humph! Taoist Chin sneered. "I'm being straightforward. I'm just reminding you that you've guessed correctly. So, regardless of whether you're telling the truth or not, whether you have other thoughts or not, put them away now. Kneel down and beg, make a scene, or act shamelessly. As long as you don't send yourself to death, that's up to you." After a moment of thought, Taoist Chin glanced at Wei Han. "Moreover, I believe that there is some fate between you and that young miss. Otherwise, the immortal seeking tower wouldn't have wasted so much time with you. She would have just thrown out a wine fruit and completely skinned you, Sword Immortal Wei. Wei Han respectfully said, "Thank you for your guidance, High Master." Taoist Qin rubbed his head and sighed. "If I can come here to give you some reminders, who can help me solve my problems? What a good seedling. As long as he enters my immeasurable temple, his name will spread throughout the central wilderness. What a pity, what a pity, what a pity, what a pity." He turned and left. The old Taoist's back was bleak and his face was lined with wrinkles. His expression was heavy with the words, unspeakable misery. In the inn, Baiji was cultivating with her eyes closed. Her face was pale and her forehead was covered with beads of sweat. Back then, the great shaman of Mang Mountain had made her cross the barbarian land's horizontal mountain and enter the western wasteland's imperial capital to seek help. This was naturally because she had a chronic illness. And this chronic illness had now fused with her sword Dao. It could erupt at any time and cause Baiji to die. The feeling that the old Taoist of immeasurable temple gave Baiji was not only that he was a good person, nor did she feel close to him. To be more precise, she had an intuition that if she could enter immeasurable temple and cultivate in the old Taoist sword Dao, her chronic illness could be cured. She could even turn a crisis into a fortuitous encounter, allowing her sword Dao to take another step forward and touch the threshold of the Deva realm. But Baiji still chose to refuse. Everything she said before was true. If she had to leave Madame to cure her chronic illness, she would rather not have all of this. In another room, Little Meat drank a cup of tea. She turned her head and glanced at Baiji's room. A cold smile appeared on her face. Stupid woman. As expected, those who could learn were all little tricks. She had no real wisdom at all. But rejecting immeasurable temple was the right thing to do. Although Baiji was fated with them, their fate was still a bit lacking. Taking it slow and enduring it was good for both of them, but she still had to go to immeasurable temple. What was the point of staying by her side? Besides being an eyesore, she was really useless. If she was lucky, she might even get a chess piece that might be of some use in the future. Little Meat was indeed tired. Entering the central wilderness divine continent was very bad for her. She was constantly suppressed and restricted. It was as if she was carrying an entire mountain on her back. She had to be careful with every step she took and avoid revealing her aura. Otherwise, if she were discovered by others, it would be a world-shattering calamity. She wasn't afraid herself. At worst, she could return home and seek refuge. But where could Chinyu escape to? He would definitely be caught. And so, and so, and so, and so, and so, and so, and so. Without further ado, he would definitely suffer a miserable fate. So, Little Meat was in a bad mood and found Chinyu displeasing to the eye. Strictly speaking, it wasn't that she was throwing a tantrum, but that there was a reason for it. It was late at night, and yet Little Meat was still awake. This was because she was waiting for someone. That boy, unless he was stupid to the extreme, he wouldn't be able to understand this. If he didn't come, then she could only blame herself for making a mistake. The fate between Baiji and Immeasurable Temple would have to be endured in the future. At this moment, Little Meat, who had put down her teacup, curled her lips and revealed a smile. Several breaths of time later, there was a knock on the door. Wei Han requests an audience with Madame. The door opened. Little Meat was sitting motionlessly. Sword Immortal Wei, you have chased me here in the middle of the night. Are you here to seek revenge? Wei Han untied the long sword on his back and put it aside. Only then did he kneel on the ground and kowtow 3 times. Dong, dong, dong. The sound was deep and the ground trembled. He looked up, revealing his red and swollen forehead. With an extremely respectful tone, he said, Wei Han has come to kowtow and apologize to Madame for my previous offense. Little Meat pointed at the door. I've finished kowtowing. If there's nothing else, Sword Immortal Wei, please do as you please. Wei Han kowtowed 3 more times. Madam, Wei Han has a blood feud that has yet to be avenged. I beg you to help me reopen my path of cultivation. Once my revenge is avenged, Wei Han's life will be yours." Little Meat gently rapped the table with her fingers. "And if I don't agree?" Wei Han knelt to the ground and respectfully said, "Wei Han will rise and leave. I will come back tomorrow." Little Meat humphed. "At least you aren't an idiot. Otherwise, even if your head was smashed to pieces, I wouldn't give you a second glance." Wei Han was overjoyed. His face was filled with excitement and joy, but he didn't dare to reveal too much. He only kowtowed even more respectfully. "To you, central, desolate, sword cultivators, having your life sword destroyed is indeed a matter that damages your foundation and breaks your great Tao. But to me, this isn't difficult at all. I can save you, but the conditions will change. From this day forth, you will be my chess piece. If I tell you to kill someone, then you must do so. Kill without asking for a reason. If I don't tell you to kill, even if your past enemies are right in front of you, you will still have to endure it and not reveal anything. Of course, I will promise you that you will have your wish fulfilled and your revenge will be avenged." Wei Han didn't hesitate at all. "I am willing, no. From this moment forth, I will be Madam's evil dog. I will only listen to your orders." Little Meat coldly sneered. "I said you were smart, but you turned around and became an idiot. You must listen to my words, and you must also listen to Qin Yu's words. Do you understand?" She waved her hand. "As for being a dog, you came too late. I already have a dog by my side, and it's quite a coincidence that he is also a sword cultivator. I don't like too many dogs. One is enough. So, you can be at ease and be an obedient chess piece, understand?" Wei Han respectfully kowtowed. "Yes." Little Meat lifted a hand and pointed a finger between Wei Han's eyebrows. He stuffily coughed, and his face paled. The phantom of a broken sword appeared above his head. He lifted a hand and grasped forwards. The tip of the broken sword was taken into Little Meat's palm, and the rest of the broken sword violently shook. Wei Han's body shivered, and his face was drained of all color. His body emitted cracking sounds as countless wounds appeared on his body. Fresh blood gushed out, and in an instant he was dyed red with blood. And at this time, the broken sword began to regenerate. After several breaths of time, it had become a complete sword. It was just that the upper half was a bit illusory. Little Meat drew back her hand. Wei Han fell to the ground with a thud. He gasped for breath, his body twitching uncontrollably. But at this time his eyes were wide open and filled with wild joy. How many years had it been? Ever since the calamity of the past when his life sword was broken, he had never felt his sword intent completely flow through his body. Even though this was a completely unfamiliar sword Tao, it was profound and lofty like a path that led to the heavens, and it shot straight into the clouds. "Your sword path has been broken, and there is no longer any possibility for you to reach greater heights. So, I have given you a completely new sword path, but this has its drawbacks. Although there are no obstacles ahead of you, and as long as you are willing to suffer, you can rapidly rise. But your achievements in the sword path have already been determined today. It will be impossible for you to rise any further." Wei Han struggled to stand up. He knelt to the ground and kowtowed. "Wei Han is satisfied. Thank you, madam." Little Meat waved her hand. Wei Han staggered away. The door closed on its own. The bloodstains on the ground seemed to be wiped away by a great invisible hand. Little Meat looked up and rubbed her eyebrows. Her eyes revealed a weariness that could not be concealed. She stood up and staggered to the bed. Then she threw herself onto it and fell into a deep sleep. Qin Yu stood outside the door and listened to the gentle breathing inside. His brow furrowed slightly, revealing a bit of worry and unease. When Wei Han arrived, he had already noticed that this had nothing to do with cultivation. Rather, it was the disparity in realms. The 9 bends to heaven great Tao had not only given Qinyu a stronger future, but also astonishing perception. The great net of heaven and earth existed at all times. As long as he willed it, no one under the Emperor realm could escape. With a creak, the door to the side opened and Baiji walked out. She glanced at Qinyu with a calm expression and said, "Lord Marquis, go cultivate. I will guard the madam." Neither of them were stupid. They all understood each other's true feelings. Since this was the case, there was no need to hide it. Qinyu was very worried about Baiji, but there was no problem with her loyalty to Little Meat. So, after confirming that Little Meat had only fallen asleep and her aura was slightly weak, there was nothing wrong with her, he nodded and left. Baiji watched Qinyu leave. Then, she pushed open the door and entered the room. Her eyes softened as she looked at the sleeping madam. After thinking for a moment, she didn't dare approach. She sat cross-legged at the door. The next day, Little Meat woke up very late. When she opened her eyes and saw Baiji, her eyes were cold. "Madam, you're awake." Baiji bowed respectfully. Little Meat said, "Did Qinyu come by last night?" Baiji said yes. "The Lord Marquis carefully sensed your aura. He only returned to his room to continue cultivating after confirming that there were no problems." Little Meat glanced at her. "Are you really not willing to go to Immeasurable Temple?" Baiji nodded. "This servant only wishes to follow the madam in this life. I have no other thoughts." Little Meat sneered. "Stay by my side, and then when you can't suppress the sword energy in your body and die with me—" Baiji took a deep breath. This servant would rather fall to hell and never be reincarnated than harm the madam in the slightest. "Humph, idiot." Little Meat's eyes were cold. "Do you really think you can harm me in the slightest if you explode? But you are my servant at the very least. What will I gain if you die like this? Go to Immeasurable Temple. Follow that old Taoist and cultivate your sword Tao. Come back when you've touched the threshold of the immortal realm." Chapter 1662. Baiji slightly opened her mouth. She knelt on the ground and kowtowed. "Yes." Meaty's lips curved up. "You've indeed learned a lot of clever tricks. Then screw off." She lifted a hand and struck the half-sword shadow into Baiji's body. Baiji stuffily coughed and vomited great mouthfuls of blood. But her eyes brightened instead. "As I thought, although the madam is fierce to me, she still values me. Otherwise, she wouldn't have given me half a sword path. It just so happened to be able to suppress the sickness in my body." Meaty revealed a look of disgust. She slapped Baiji and sent her flying out the door. Qinyu stopped walking. He looked at the scene in front of him. Going over wasn't good, but turning around and leaving was even worse. But Baiji didn't seem to feel any awkwardness. She stood up and glanced at him. She lightly said, "I'm leaving." Qinyu was startled. He immediately cupped his hands together. "Congratulations." Baiji had no expression. "When I'm not here, if the madam feels any discomfort, you must take care of her. If there is even the slightest mistake, I will die with you." She didn't have full confidence she could kill Qinyu, but it wouldn't be difficult to die with him. Within the room, Meaty's icy voice echoed out, "Baiji, if you want to die, then don't leave." Baiji respectfully bowed and turned to leave, vanishing from sight. Qinyu rubbed his nose. He thought to himself, "What do you two want? Don't drag me into this. Injustice, this was really injustice. Qinyu." Meaty's voice was filled with annoyance and depression. Qinyu coughed and calmly entered the room. "I came to see how you were doing. Also, when are we leaving?" Meaty's eyes were dangerous. She stared at Qinyu for several breaths of time. Luckily, his concealment skills were excellent and he didn't reveal any emotions. "Humph." Meaty stood up and walked out. She used her actions to answer. The Limitless Temple's Taoist Qin had spent the entire night scratching his lungs. He was holding a pot of wine and drowning his sorrows. As he looked at Baiji walking towards him, he was stunned silly. "There is something I must make clear to you. For the rest of my life, I will only be the madam's maid. Once I finish learning the sword, I will go find the madam. If you want, I will follow you to the limitless temple." Taoist, Chin almost cried tears of joy. "As long as little grandaunt is willing to follow me to the immeasurable temple to inherit our lineage, I won't have the slightest objection to whatever you say." Therefore, in the immortal-seeking restaurant, the old Taoist who owed a huge debt for wine left behind a sentence to tell the innkeeper that he didn't need the innkeeper to return the rest of the money. Then he took his newly acquired, treasured junior marshal sister and boarded the carriage, leaving the Jade Gate Pass. As for the waiter of the immortal-seeking tower, he really didn't care. It wasn't because he knew some inside information, but because shopkeeper Liu had already ordered that this old immortal of immeasurable temple was not to stop him, no matter what he did. The carriage continued on into the distance. The old Taoist priest personally drove the carriage. He could feel the aura of the way of the sword emanating from the carriage. He could not help but lift his hand and take a sip of wine. His eyes narrowed in bliss. "Master, disciple Qin Chuan did not disappoint you. I've finally found a successor who can inherit your legacy." The Jade Gate Pass was extremely large, so large that there were 3 mountains and 6 rivers within. It was also divided into 2 regions, inner and outer. A simple explanation was that the East Pole Mountain at the edge of the western wilderness was nothing more than an entire mountain range that originated from the central wilderness. It was a common-looking mountain top. Suppressing West, Fighting Bull, and Sifting Star were the names of the 3 mountains within the pass. They were arranged from west to east, and now Qin Yu and Little Meaty were walking on Fighting Bull Mountain. That's right, they were honestly walking forwards, one step at a time. Qin Yu asked for the reason, but Little Meaty sneered in response, saying that he didn't understand. Indeed, when it came to choking people, Meaty was the best at it. Qin Yu willingly admitted defeat. Fighting Bull Mountain was also known as Fighting Bull Mountain. In the legends, there was a great monster that cultivated deep within this mountain. Because of its cultivation, the surrounding land for 1,000 miles collapsed, forming the scene of an earth bull turning over. A great cultivator came here and used the supernatural powers of an immortal to subdue this great monster. He shattered its body and captured its soul to refine it into an earth vein, repairing the shattered earth and gathering heaven and earth's spiritual energy. Afterwards, the Jade Gate Pass was constructed here. This was because after refining the great monster soul, it would form a stable earth vein. Otherwise, an ordinary region wouldn't be able to withstand the weight of the Jade Gate Pass. It would likely collapse under the pressure, creating an endless abyss. Now, as Little Meaty walked on the mountain, the monster's soul trembled deep underground. The phantom of a giant bull appeared and dissipated in the earth vein where red and yellow wove together. Fear appeared in its eyes. But within this fear, there was also excitement and disbelief. As they walked forwards, even if a cultivator didn't fly into the skies or burrow into the earth, their legs were still far stronger than a normal person's. Fighting Bull Mountain wasn't a treacherous place. After 4 hours, they arrived at the summit. Little Meaty frowned, a bit of impatience on her face. She suddenly sneered, "You better think this through. If you don't come out now, you will never need to come out again." As Qin Yu was frowning and his heart was chilled, the ground suddenly shook. A tall and sturdy bull with glossy fur leapt out. Its 2 front hooves fell to the ground, and it respectfully bowed its head. This little monster greets 2 immortals. Not only did it speak human speech, but it also spoke with perfect articulation. Qin Yu never imagined that there would be a giant bull hidden beneath Fighting Bull Mountain. After carefully looking it up and down several times, he was able to see some of its depths. This giant bull seemed material, but it was actually formed from the condensation of strength. In essence, it was the soul of a great monster yellow bull, very strong. Unfortunately, Qin Yu didn't know that the 9-tailed celestial fox that was hiding in the house had been killed. Otherwise, he would have discovered that this bull in front of him was a genuine great monster. It wasn't just a little bit stronger than the nine-tailed celestial fox that had luckily managed to advance. Of course, to little Meaty, this bit of strength made no difference. Even if she was different from before, of the myriad monsters in this world, none of them dared to bare their fangs at her. Otherwise, after moving from the Western Wasteland's imperial capital to the Thousand Islands County, they wouldn't have been so angry and hesitant before finally lowering their heads and admitting defeat. Little Meaty glanced at the giant bull. Her eyes were empty, but as they fell on the bull, they seemed even heavier than Fighting Bull Mountain. The bull's 4 legs buckled, and it fell to the ground, its body shivering. Little Meaty furrowed her eyebrows. She thought that the monster races of this world were far too timid. They weren't like this in the past. But luckily, being timid didn't affect her ability to use it. Yellow Bull, meeting me today is your good fortune. As long as you are willing to offer up a monster core in your body, I will throw you into the monster pool so that your spiritual wisdom won't be extinguished and you can reincarnate once more. The giant bull shed tears of gratitude. It nodded again and again. Thank you, great immortal. This little monster is willing. All of the rumors originated from the truth, but the hateful cultivators of Great Cheen had distorted the key points. In the past, in order to build the Jade Gate Pass, the Great Cheen Empire had used a scheme to force it out from underground, resulting in the tragic scene of the bull flipping over 1,000 miles. Afterwards, they found an excuse to kill it and have its flesh and blood fuse into the earth. Then they refined its soul into the veins of the earth and used it to stabilize the mountains and rivers, allowing it to withstand the endless pressure of the Jade Gate Pass. Now, its soul had fused with the veins of the earth and was close to the primordial divine Tao. Although it seemed undying and indestructible, it was actually constantly withstanding the pain of the mountain. Unless the Jade Gate Pass was closed, it would forever be a convict with no time limit. This sort of longevity was like being tormented by fire, like being placed on a mountain of knives and boiling oil. The giant bull didn't want to endure this for another day, so it agreed without hesitation. Of course, Meaty's promise was also an important reason. To be reborn in the monster pool was something that only peak great monsters had the qualifications to do. By being born with this knowledge, one's soul would be intact and their next life's cultivation would be like a tiger that had grown wings. They would also be able to obtain the destiny of the monster race. As for why little Meaty had only said a few words, and this great monster that had lived under Nyodo Mountain for who knew how many years had directly believed her, that involved an extremely secretive reason. The moment little Meaty took her first step into Nyodo Mountain, the big yellow ox had already discovered it. Little Meaty raised her hand and pointed. The big cow in front of her was like a bubble. It burst and dissipated with a pop. A perfectly round inner core the size of a knuckle appeared, completely golden in color. It spun around and fell into her hand. She looked down at it and seemed satisfied with its quality. She nodded and casually tossed the core into her mouth. Crunch, crunch. It felt like she had casually eaten a candy bean. Cheen Yu's lips twitched. He thought that the scene in front of him was so cruel that it made his hair stand on end. Moreover, it was over just like that. She had eaten the core in a single bite. What about the promise she made to the big yellow bull? Gulp, Meaty swallowed and licked her lips. She probably thought that the core tasted quite good. She reached out and grabbed Cheen Yu. Then, the two of them instantly vanished from sight. When he reappeared, he was already outside the 3 mountains. He gasped for breath and subconsciously turned his head to look behind him. He could faintly make out a towering mountain that seemed to support the heavens, piercing into the clouds. Sifting Star Mountain. The distance they had crossed this time was astonishing. They had passed through the entire mountain. Even with Cheen Yu's physique, his chest still shook and his complexion paled. Meaty glanced at him. What are you doing? Since you've eaten it, why haven't you hurried away? Are you waiting for others to catch you? She sneered, but her mood right now wasn't too bad. She had eaten a great monster's core and fused it with the earth vein for 10,000 years. Now that it had been contaminated by the earth energy, it could help her conceal her aura. She didn't need to be as cautious as before. Thus, this was why Meaty had been able to bring Chinyu here and use supernatural teleportation. Before this, she definitely wouldn't have been able to do this. Chinyu thought for a moment. What about that big yellow bull? It was stupid and I ate it. Is that my fault? What a self-righteous attitude. Chinyu rubbed his eyebrows. I just don't think you're lying to it. Humph. Sir Chin, I fear you haven't heard of a saying before. In this world, the more beautiful a woman is, the less trustworthy her words are. Chinyu coughed. Miss Meaty is certainly incomparably beautiful, but I think you are an exception. Meaty rolled her eyes. What a bootlicker. He turned around and walked away, muttering in a low voice. Before I ate the beast core, I sent its soul away. But the demon pool isn't that easy to enter. Whether or not it can smoothly reincarnate will depend on its luck. Chinyu smiled. After passing the 3 mountains, if there wasn't an accident, there was also the Hung River. After crossing it, they would leave the boundary of the Jade Gate Pass and officially leave the borders of the Central Wasteland Divine Continent. The vast world, the millions and millions of powerhouses. This was the most vast and boundless world of the great desolate world. We've arrived. Although the current monster race was far from being as extravagant as their ancestors, there was still a lineage that had been passed down since ancient times. They didn't lack things like a foundation. The monster pool was the most important part of the monster race. It was known as one of their foundations that couldn't be lost. Its origins were unknown, but it seemed that it had already appeared when the monster race was born. In this world, as long as the monster race cultivated to the level of a great monster, they would have a faint chance of completing samsara in the monster pool after death, condensing flesh and blood to be reborn. They would be able to preserve their soul and be born with even greater talent for cultivation. Of course, the so-called faint chance was really only a faint chance. Roughly, for every 700 to 800 great monsters that died, only one lucky person would be born. Besides that, there were only 2 choices. Either you were strong enough to touch upon the destiny of the monster race, or you had a great background and had someone backing you. And today, as the waves tumbled about in the monster pool, a massive amount of destiny of the monster race gathered. A little monster began to condense flesh and blood. The eyes of the monster race guarding the monster pool brightened, revealing joy. This meant that 10 years from now, with the birth of this little monster, another pillar of the monster race would be born. In the future, as long as he didn't perish midway, he would surely become a world-shaking figure amongst the monster race. And the only thing that puzzled the great monsters was that the desolate region had been peaceful recently. They hadn't heard of any great monsters perishing. Could it be that some senior that was in seclusion had failed to break through and died in meditation? Countless eyes gathered on the monster pool. They watched as the little monster's embryo gradually stabilized. Their eyes pierced through the membrane, and they could faintly make out what seemed to be a little yellow cow. Shwa! In the skies above the monster pool, a figure appeared out of thin air. He had blue hair and blue clothes, his appearance unparalleled. His calm eyes fell on the newly born embryo. Greetings, blue divinity! The great monsters bowed in unison, all of them extremely respectful. Faintly, there were 1 or 2 eyes that revealed burning passion and adoration, but they immediately covered it up, as if they were afraid that they would annoy this monster race legend and be expelled from the monster pool. Not only would they lose their good fortune in their cultivation, but more importantly, they would never have the chance to see Blue Divinity's face again in their lives. The blue-haired Blue Divinity waved her hand, indicating for the great monsters to rise. She looked at the monster pool several times, her eyebrows furrowing together. A great monster took a deep breath. He stepped forwards and cupped his hands together. Lord Blue Divinity, is there something wrong? Reincarnation in the monster pool was the key to the continuation of the monster race's destiny. But there had been accidents before. Many years ago, there was a human monster cultivator who used some unknown evil method and was actually substituted by him. After seizing the body of a great monster, he borrowed the body of a great monster and smoothly reincarnated into the monster pool. Luckily, this matter was discovered by Blue Divinity. Before this great monster cultivator could plunder the source of the monster pool, he was killed with lightning speed. The other great monsters all revealed dignified expressions. Blue Divinity hesitated for a moment. Then she slowly shook her head. There is nothing wrong. He is indeed the reincarnation of a great monster of my monster race. What she found strange was that although this ox monster had the strength of a great monster, he clearly didn't have the qualifications to reincarnate in the monster pool. It was clear that someone had opened a back door for him. But what was strange was that even though she was the guardian of the monster pool, she hadn't felt anything strange from start to finish. Just which great elder of my monster race did this? Blue Divinity revealed a thoughtful look. This was the so-called twists and turns of the mountain, the so-called glimmers of hope at the darkest hour, the so-called the heavens never shut off all paths. Yang Fanshan was filled with sorrow. In the end, he didn't choose the second path. But just as he was about to step out of the boundary of the Jade Gate Pass, he actually saw the two most important people in his life. Truly, he wept tears of joy. As he wiped away his tears, he strode forwards, fearing that if he was even half a step slower, the two people in front of him would vanish into thin air. Your Excellency Qi, madam, it's a small world. Chapter 1663. The goat-like Yang family exalted was surnamed Jinshin. At this time his eyes widened. As he looked at Yang Fanshan running forwards, he subconsciously stopped. The so-called old martial artists had countless experiences, and these experiences told him that there weren't too many coincidences in this world. If there really was such a thing, then it must have been done intentionally. There must be another reason behind it. Then, why had the two people resting in the pavilion by the roadside come here? Jinshin didn't know, but deep in his heart, he subconsciously felt restless. At this time, he was already considering whether or not he should abandon his job as the Yang family exalted and turn tail and run away. At this time, the madam sitting in the pavilion seemed to be attracted by Yang Fanshan's voice. She looked over without expression. Then, her gaze swept over him in a seemingly ordinary manner. Jinshin lowered his head, beads of sweat covering his forehead. He didn't dare to hesitate any longer and quickly followed. He had to accept his fate. There was no need to think about running away. Otherwise, the old exalted didn't doubt that he would only have enough time to turn around and then everything would go black. Yang Fanshan stepped into the pavilion. He calmed his breathing and impatiently said, "Your Excellency, I would like to make a transaction with you and the madam." He was too scared. He didn't want to wait a moment longer. Just as they were about to leave the boundary of Jade Gate Pass, Meaty suddenly said she was tired. She pointed at the pavilion and the two of them sat down. Then they waited for Yang Fanshan. Qinyu glanced at her. Her expression was calm and indifferent, as if she didn't care at all. Her acting skills were quite good. He didn't know what Meaty was thinking, but he guessed that it was related to the transaction Yang Fanshan spoke of. He cupped his hands together and said, "Sir Yang, meeting here is fate. How about you tell me what this transaction is about?" Standing outside the pavilion, the old exalted carefully swept his eyes over the three people in the pavilion. He sighed inwardly. Yang Fanshan usually seems like a smart person. So how come he's such a stupid fellow today? What nonsense transaction. Others are just waiting for you to deliver yourself to their doorstep. Once this topic was brought up, it was impossible to shake it off. Today, the two people in the pavilion, whether they lived or died, would all depend on their luck. Of course, thoughts were thoughts and wails were wails in his heart. But Jinshin didn't reveal any of his thoughts. This was also one of the survival philosophies of the old martial artists. Whether he would be able to turn the situation around or die without a burial place, it all depended on what he said next. Yang Fan's Han sucked in a deep breath. Your Excellency Qin Yu, Madam, I won't hide anything from you. This time, I was ordered by my family to enter the Central Desolate to complete a transaction that my Yang family made with some great figure in the Central Desolate. This Yang doesn't know the specifics of the transaction. I didn't mean to hide it from the two of you. Please don't take it to heart. Looking at Qin Yu's complexion, Yang Fan's Han calmed down a little. He continued to say, My transaction is that I hope that the two of you can help me complete this matter. As long as the two of you help me get the transaction item and return to the Jade Gate Pass smoothly, I will give this item to you as a reward. He flipped his hand, and a jade tablet appeared in his palm. It looked like it had been buried underground for many years. Mud had seeped into it, and its surface was a mixture of yellow, white, and green. It looked very unremarkable. Qin Yu secretly frowned. If it weren't for Yang Fanshan's solemn expression and the reluctance in his eyes, he would have thought this Sir Yang was joking, because this jade tablet was really very ordinary. There was nothing special about it. At least it was so in his eyes. Little Meaty suddenly said, We agree to this transaction. Yang Fan's Han was overjoyed. Thank you, madam. Thank you, Your Excellency Qin Yu. Outside the pavilion, the old exalted was expressionless, but his heart was filled with despair. A worn-out jade tablet could actually invite these two unfathomably mysterious people in front of him. This was definitely a solid piece of evidence. If he knew this would happen, he would have learned from that woman when he was in the outer reaches of the Jade Gate Pass. If he was expelled, there would be great troubles in the future. But that was still better than being unlucky right now. The combined group of 4 continued on their way. According to Yang Fan's Han, they needed to go to a place called Dita Mountain and find a special guardian of the pagoda. The Yang family had their own way of identifying them. As long as they saw this person, they would naturally know. As for Dita Mountain, it wasn't too far from the Jade Gate Pass. It was located west of the Great Qin Empire in the Langya region. It was a famous tourist attraction. As an old exalted who had visited the Great Qin Empire several times in the past, he braced himself as he met Yang Fanshan's eyes and explained, Dita Mountain is famous because of the hundreds of stone pagodas that surround it. It is said that the pagodas on this mountain all have a great origin, and many lucky chances are hidden within. For many years, the reason that Dita Mountain has always been visited by tourists is because there have truly been people who have found a great good fortune here. Through Jin Shen's introduction, Qin Yu gained some understanding of Dita Mountain. When he heard something interesting, he would casually ask a few questions. Little Meaty remained silent the entire time. Qin Yu could be considered to have some understanding of her and could see that she really didn't care at all. In other words, Dita Mountain wasn't Little Meaty's goal. But thinking about it, if they really wanted to go to Dita Mountain, they wouldn't need to go through so much trouble. After all, they had their own legs. Then, it could only be Yang Fan's Han. Qin Yu glanced at him, a bit of pity in his eyes. He thought to himself, Your life really isn't good. To think that Little Meaty would place so much importance on you. This thought had clearly been caught. Little Meaty turned her head. Although she didn't speak, countless saber lights and sword shadows enveloped him. Qin Yu lowered his head, acting as if he didn't know. The old exalted Jinshin had no expression. He swept his eyes over Yang Fan's Han, thinking that this Yang family brat had taken a turn for the better. But who would have thought that he had escaped from the tiger's mouth and fallen into the wolf's lair? This time he was going to die. My arms and legs are old, and it's already good enough that I can protect myself. I have the heart, but I don't have the strength. I really have the heart, but I don't have the strength. He lowered his head and pretended that he was blind and deaf, unable to see anything. He didn't say a single word. Qin Yu turned his head and looked at the old exalted Jinshin behind him. He thought that this person's name really wasn't wrong, but he was thinking a bit too much. The Langya region was close to the Jade Gate Pass. It was true that it wasn't too far away, but the territory of the central wasteland divine continent was far, far too vast. A single piece of land was comparable to the sum of the other 4 upper wastelands. So, even if Duta Mountain was within the Langia region, wanting to rely on 2 legs to reach it wouldn't be easy. But the central wasteland divine continent was different from the western wasteland. There were no transmission arrays here, so if one wanted to travel long distances, they could only take the ferry from the various mountains. Compared to a transmission array, it was much slower, but the advantage was that one didn't need to provide proof of one's qualifications. As long as one paid a fee, they could smoothly board the ferry. The group of 4 arrived at the edge of the Langia region. After arriving at a place called Song City, the old exalted Jinshin received orders to look for a ferry. He had done this several times before, so he was relatively experienced. Along the way, he struggled with his thoughts. Should he flee or not? This thought tumbled through his mind several hundred times. But in the end, Jinshin suppressed the urge in his heart. There was nothing he could do about it. That madam's eyes were far too horrifying, so horrifying that whenever he thought of running away, he would involuntarily recall it. Then his entire body would turn cold and his thoughts would turn numb. Their luck wasn't bad. Tomorrow there would be a small, short-distance ferry that would pass by Song City's pier. Although they would need to take a detour, it would take at most 6 or 7 days to reach Dita Mountain. Little Meaty didn't have any objections to this, so Chinyu nodded in agreement. As for the 30-year survival period, the 2 of them were well aware of this. Since Little Meaty didn't oppose it, that meant it was worth the delay. Moreover, these several days wouldn't be a waste. Yang Fanshan had already indicated that he would reserve the best rooms on the ferry for them to live in. He also vaguely mentioned that there was an abundance of spiritual strength. This Sir Yang was indeed a meticulous person. He was able to sense Chinyu's current thirst for cultivation. Of course, Chinyu didn't say anything. It was only his actions that revealed some information. These were the so-called small details. Chinyu wasn't the only one who understood this. So, did Yang Fanshan really not sense this coincidence? Chinyu didn't think so. Jinshin was a veteran of the martial world. It was good that he was putting his own safety first, but he feared he had underestimated this Yang family young master who only cared about happiness on the surface. Since Little Meaty had handled things so crudely, nearly placing them in the open, that meant she didn't care about being discovered. And this was also the key reason why Yang Fanshan was able to remain calm. Chinyu faintly smiled. He no longer thought about it. He closed his eyes and began to cultivate. The night passed without words. On the next day, 2 hours before the ferry arrived, the group of 4 left the inn and arrived at the pier. Any pier in the world could be considered the most lively and bustling area in the entire city, and this place was no exception. There were countless stalls selling all sorts of magic tools on the side of the road. You only heard a few words before his heart shook. He thought that the stalls on the side of the street in front of him covered the majority of the central wasteland divine continent's immortal influences, sect artifacts, and treasures. It had to be said, each and every one of them seemed quite good at bluffing. But this was only bluffing. Chinyu swept his eyes over them and couldn't help but wryly smile. He thought that the cultivators of the central wasteland divine continent were actually so down to earth. But even if they were selling fake goods, couldn't they at least put in some effort? Such shoddy production was hard to look at. They found a ticket booth and paid a sum of money. But they were only able to purchase a small courtyard, and this was Yang Fanshan's additional price. Looking at the person in charge of the ticket booth and the smile on his face, one could tell that this wasn't a small sum. Short-distance ferries weren't large. For sects with some background, as long as they took care of matters along the way, they would be able to travel unimpeded. For instance, the Qinglin sect's ferry never went far. Its route was right here in the Langia region. It wandered back and forth in this area. It was said that in the early years, a female disciple of the Qinglin sect had caught the eye of the Langya region's region lord and was taken in as a concubine. Unexpectedly, the region lord favored her, and she gave birth to a pair of children. Their cultivation talents were also quite good. Thus, the Qinglin sect's fairy was created. Within the Langya region, the various immortal families were well aware of this matter. Thus, they turned a blind eye to it. After all, they still had to take into account the region lord's face. Of course, for many years, nothing happened because the Qinglin sect knew how to conduct themselves and never took the initiative to stir up trouble. After waiting for an hour, the ferry arrived at the pier a little late. The people of the Qinglin sect jumped off the ferry and began to arrange for people to disembark and disembark. They repeatedly apologized to the complaints in their ears. Finally, they gave all the guests boarding the ferry today a 10% discount. Only then was everyone satisfied. The so-called small ferry wasn't small. At the very least, it was much more extravagant than the airships that Qinyu had seen before that transported armies. There were many buildings on the ferry, and several streets were laid out. It was just like a small town. Qinyu and Little Meaty's residence was a small courtyard in a secluded area. The terrain was very high and they could easily overlook the surroundings. There were also trees planted on the side, making the environment quite good. According to the Qinglin sect's directions, they smoothly boarded the ferry. However, there was a small accident when they checked in. In the end, Qinyu and Little Meaty checked in. The three people opposite had ugly expressions. They gloomily flicked their sleeves and left. The general situation was that they had reserved this small courtyard first. Unfortunately, they weren't a match for Brother Kongfang's might. After receiving a large price increase from Yang Fanshan, the Qinglin sect handed over the courtyard to them without hesitation. Guests, we are truly sorry to have disturbed you. In a moment, a maid will bring over several plates of local immortal fruits. Consider this a token of our sect's apology. The Qinglin sect guide cupped his hands together in apology, but his expression was calm. There were only a few small and quiet courtyards on the ferry, and they also had the effect of gathering spiritual strength. There was no clear price tag, and whoever offered the highest price could obtain them. If one wasn't richer than others, then they could only lower their heads. Putting on a front would only cause trouble for themselves. There was no use at all. However, these people didn't cause trouble, which was a wise decision. Otherwise, in the Langya region, according to the sect master's words, the Qinglin sect would never cause trouble on their own initiative and should always be on good terms with others. But if someone tried to climb over our heads, then there was absolutely nothing to fear. The people from the Qinglin sect turned and left. Qinyu frowned. He looked in the direction the three people left in, a thoughtful look in his eyes. What a heavy killing intent. It was just a minor matter of competing for a place to live. Was there a need to go so far? Or could it be that these three people who boarded the ferry had killing intent in their hearts? However, this had nothing to do with them. Since they had chosen to keep the peace, Qinyu wouldn't take the initiative to cause trouble. He pushed open the door to the small courtyard. Soon there was a knock on the door. Two maids on the ferry brought over several plates of immortal fruits. They couldn't be considered precious items, but they were fresh and refreshing. They could be sold on the ferry for a good amount and could also be used to generate income. Two guests, we are the maids of the courtyard you live in. No matter what you need, you only need to call us. The two maids respectfully bowed. Without any extra movements, they turned and left the courtyard. Their actions were well thought out. Meaty picked up a fruit and casually ate it. As she chewed, she looked at Qinyu. You look quite beautiful. Why don't you stay? Perhaps, as long as you are willing and your mouth is a little sweeter, they might even warm your bed. Qinyu was expressionless. He thought that when she said these words, could she not keep chewing on them? He was panicking. Cough! This courtyard is truly worthy of being seized at a high price. It is truly rich with spiritual strength. Death is like a man I can't bear to part with day and night. I'm going to start cultivating. He chose a room and pushed open the door. He casually swept his eyes around and didn't find anything wrong with it. Then he really began to cultivate. Katcha! Katcha! Meaty ate the fruit with relish. She glanced at Chinyu's closed door and then reached out to take another fruit. An hour later, Meaty patted her flat abdomen without the slightest bulge. She thought for a moment and rang the bell on the table. The two maids that had left before pushed open the door and entered. What instructions does guest have? Give me another portion of those fruits from before. The two maids couldn't help but widen their eyes. They glanced at the empty tray on the table and then at the piles of fruit cores, peels, and other things on the ground. They revealed stunned expressions. Meaty frowned. You didn't hear me? The two maids hurriedly nodded. Guest, please wait a moment. After taking the tray, the two hurried away. 7 days later, they arrived at the pier of Dota Mountain. Before disembarking, Yang Fanshan received the bill for the extra expenses of the small courtyard. As he looked at the number, his lips twitched. Chapter 1664. The Qinglin sect person on the other side sighed with emotion. The guest in the courtyard seems to like our Langya region's specialty immortal fruits very much. He eats several plates of them almost every day. The bill has detailed expenses. I have already given the guest a great discount on the total price. If you are worried, you can compare. In 7 days, the cost of fruits had more than doubled the small courtyard's rent. This was the first time this person had seen something like this. The old exalted quietly reminded, Sir, there is no need to compare. The Qinglin sect has always been famous. They wouldn't cheat on such a small amount of money. The Qinglin sect person smiled. This old mister is right. Our Qinglin sect is the most fair. We never swindle or cheat. Yang Fanshan glanced at him and nodded with a smile. I'm just a bit surprised. Pay up. Then he thought for a moment and cupped his hands together. Immortal Master, do you have any extra immortal fruits on the ferry? I would like to buy some more. The Qinglin sect person smiled and nodded. Of course. I will give the guest a little more discount this time. After the payment was made, the 4 people disembarked from the ferry. Dota Mountain was truly worthy of being a famous scenic spot in the Langya region. The scale of the pier was far greater than that of Song City. Besides the countless roadside stalls, both sides of the road were filled with shops. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that business was booming. The group of 4 didn't have any thoughts of shopping at the pier. But as Chinyu hurried along, he saw 3 rather interesting shops. He didn't enter, but from the hanging banners, he could guess what they were selling. The first shop had a banner that read, 100-year celebration, great discount, 20% off all purchases. The second shop had slightly more words, price raised, then lowered, ripping off all passers-by. The dog fart on the side was truly stinky. The third shop was relatively simple. The brother next door cursed extremely well. As Chinyu passed by, he could see from afar that the workers of the 3 shops were loudly cursing and spitting. Their faces were flushed red, and they wished they could tear off each other's mouths. But none of them truly did anything. At most, they played around with their mouths. The commotion attracted many passers-by to stop and watch. The workers of the other shops at the side watched the show with a mysterious smile, as if they were talking about a dog biting another dog. However, they didn't notice that the waiters of the 3 shops were cursing each other in full swing. They were patting their chests and making gestures, saying that the goods in their shops were genuine, and that whoever lied would be the one who had committed adultery. They had attracted quite a number of people into the shops. Compared to the other shops nearby, their business was not just a little bit better. It could be considered a good business method. However, the person who could use this trick was probably not a simple person. Otherwise, The various curses of the shop assistants would be enough to make those who were not very broad-minded spit out a few mouthfuls of blood on the spot. After leaving the pier, Mount Duotah was right in front of him. This prosperous place was now in the hands of a sect called the Red Cloud Sect. Whether it was to climb the mountain for sightseeing, to search for opportunities, or to explore the ancient ruins, everyone had to buy a ticket to climb the mountain, and each person had to pay a lapis lazuli copperplate. The Great Qin Empire was the only country in the central, barren, divine continent. It had been passed down to this day and had never changed. It had established a universal currency system. For example, the lapis lazuli copper coin was made by mixing two special materials according to a certain ratio and using a special anti-counterfeiting method. It was issued by the Great Qin Empire's Ministry of Revenue and could be circulated throughout the entire central barren territory. The release of the lapis lazuli copper coin was not only guaranteed by the Qin Empire's strong national power, but also because the copper coin made by immortals could be regarded as a spirit tool with a weak function and a single function, a container that could absorb the spiritual power of heaven and earth. Every lapis lazuli copper coin could absorb a certain amount of spiritual power of heaven and earth. It was extremely pure and could be directly absorbed by cultivators, eliminating the refining process. Simply put, it could directly help cultivators speed up their cultivation and convert it into power in their bodies. Of course, in reality, very few people would do this because after absorbing spiritual power, the lapis lazuli copper coin would be damaged and lose its original value. The spiritual power that cultivators obtained was not proportional to the purchasing power of the lapis lazuli copper coin itself. To cultivators, a single lapis lazuli copper coin wasn't anything at all. But it couldn't withstand the saying, many a little makes a mickle, or many a sand piled up into a mountain. And every year, cultivators would come to Duotah Mountains because of its fame. The number of cultivators was like a school of carp crossing the river. And there was no need to mention the various subsidiary industries that were born from this. For instance, the bustling pier that Qin Yu's group of four had just passed. At least a third of the shops were owned by the Red Cloud sect. Moreover, they were only rented and not sold. This was a steady source of wealth. In addition, the Red Cloud sect had always been good at doing business, so it was common knowledge that they were rich and overflowing with wealth. To Qin Yu, spending a lapis lazuli copper coin was the same as wasting a great deal of spiritual power. Thus, it was still Yang Fanshan who stepped forward. When this young master of the Yang family spent money, it could be said that he didn't even bat an eye. If he couldn't pass this hurdle in front of him, then there was only the word death for him. How could he care about such things? Moreover, the money was paid by the Yang family, not him. So what was there to feel sorry for? After handing over 4 lapis lazuli copper coins, Qin Yu received a wooden mountaineering tablet. He couldn't see what material it was made from, but it felt quite good to the touch. There were words engraved on it. Between the mountains there is a tower, and within the tower there is a spirit. The words were carved in an excellent manner. It was clear that it came from a great master. Qin Yu subconsciously twirled his fingers several times. At the foot of the mountain, the Red Cloud sect female, cultivator responsible for handing out wooden tablets, faintly smiled. If guests like it, you may take your wooden tablet with you when you descend the mountain. You only need 3 lapis lazuli copper coins. Without further ado, Yang Fanshan took out a handful of lapis lazuli copper coins and counted 12. The female cultivator checked and confirmed that there were no mistakes. She faintly smiled. "All right, I have recorded it. You may take your wooden tablets with you." The 4 people began to climb the mountain. Duotah Mountains was famous for its several hundred stone pagodas, and this naturally wasn't an undeserved reputation. Several dozen steps later, a stone pagoda appeared in front of them. The stone pagoda was hexagonal in shape and was constructed in a simple and unadorned manner. It was completely different from the current architectural style, and there were clear traces of time on its surface. The The stone was mottled and moss could be seen everywhere. There seemed to be some writing on the surface of the pagoda, but it had long since faded away. One could only faintly make out some remnant strokes. But now there was an endless stream of cultivators that climbed the mountain. Most of them chose to stop in front of this stone pagoda and carefully examine it, trying to decipher the contents of the writing on the pagoda. Qin Yu listened for a moment and understood the basic reason. Around 300 years ago, there was a disciple of a small sect who stepped into Duoda Mountains. After that, he stayed in front of this stone pagoda known as the Welcoming Pagoda for 3 days, as if he were intoxicated. After he sobered up, he turned and left, not taking a single step up the mountain again. Afterwards, this person's cultivation advanced by leaps and bounds. He led that unknown small sect to become a large sect famous for refining flying swords within Swallow Mountain. The flying swords that his sect sold were of excellent quality, and they were welcomed by all the great sword sects of the Central Desolate. Because of this, he established a good relationship with them and was able to occupy such a treasured land within Swallow Mountain where powerhouses were born. After this person became famous, he publicly admitted that he had obtained an ancient sword art inheritance from this welcoming pagoda. This caused an uproar. No one believed that a sect master of a large sect with such a profound cultivation would lie about something like this. Because of this, Duoda Mountain's fame skyrocketed. It was reasonable for this welcoming pagoda to receive so much attention. Qin Yu carefully looked at it for a moment. After determining that he had no fate with this pagoda, Midi had already left. Yang Fan's Han and exalted Jin Shin, who also hadn't obtained anything, hurriedly followed behind. There are indeed lucky chances on Duoda Mountains, but these lucky chances aren't something that can be casually obtained by others. Otherwise, the Red Cloud sect would have already sealed off this place and laid down an isolation array formation, turning this place into a mystic realm for their disciples to obtain lucky chances. Jin Shin explained with a few sentences. His tone was very respectful, and he had already started to quietly prepare for his survival. After all, although this person's goal wasn't him, killing him or not killing him was still a matter of choice. Accumulating a good impression might save his life at a critical moment. This was a valuable experience that could only be obtained after walking the martial world for so long. Qin Yu faintly smiled. There are countless lucky chances in this world. Those who are fated will obtain them. Midi coldly sneered. She rolled her eyes, disdainful of these words. If it really is, as you say, then what is the point of everyone struggling for the great Tao? We should just cultivate and wait for our lucky chances to arrive. Qin Yu lightly coughed, pretending he didn't hear anything. Beside him, Yang Fan's Han and the old exalted pretended to be deaf and mute, admiring the scenery around them. It had to be said that outside of the several hundred stone pagodas of Duoda Mountains, there were also lush forests and flowing valleys, a land rich in spiritual strength. View. It was just that in their hearts there were several considerations. It seemed that this madam was the one who truly made the decisions. Qin Yu was well aware of this. He subconsciously rubbed his nose and glanced at Midi. Couldn't she give him some face? Midi turned and walked away. Afterwards, he looked at several more stone pagodas. Because Yang Fan's Han didn't know which stone pagodas he was looking for, he could only search as he walked. Luckily, it was fine as long as he determined that the person was on the mountain. Although there were many stone pagodas, looking through them one by one would only take some time. 2 hours later, Qin Yu discovered that Midi was standing in front of a strange stone pagoda. He glanced at it several times. The reason it was strange was because the stone pagoda in front of him was like a large stick of candied hawthorn. It was the same size from top to bottom and had 11 levels. The surface was smooth and glossy without anything at all. Beneath the sunlight, it reflected a faint halo of light. Besides that, there wasn't anything strange about it at all. There were also several people beside the stone pagoda. There was a man and a woman. From their clothes, They seemed to be cultivators from the same sect. Their expressions were cold and stern, and they exuded a cold intent that didn't allow strangers to approach them. It seemed that their backgrounds weren't ordinary. On the other side was a sloppy old man. His sleeves and lapel were shiny and his hair was loose, occasionally shining with a sharp light. The last person was a young girl. She wore a bamboo hat, so it was impossible to see her appearance. But from her figure, one could tell that she wasn't too shabby. Now, with the stone pagoda in front of him, Qin Yu's eyes suddenly flashed. His gaze fell onto the man and woman, the two cold and stern cultivators. Although the man was trying his best to endure it, there was still a trace of happiness deep in his eyes. After a moment, the two people turned and left. The sloppy old man had a thoughtful look in his eyes. He glanced at Qin Yu and then turned and left in another direction. The young girl in the bamboo hat seemed a bit hesitant, but as she thought about it, she chased after the man and woman. Qin Yu took in all of this. He lowered his voice and said, "Is there something good?" At the side, the sharp-eyed young Fanshan had already led the old exalted to another side of the stone pagoda. Midi nodded. "Interesting. It seems that I underestimated this Mount Dada before." Qin Yu didn't ask any more questions. What happened just now was the best example. If there was anything to say, he could wait until he left Mount Dada. Otherwise, if he stirred up an accident, while he wasn't afraid of it, it would still be troublesome. Chapter 16, 65. After passing the Tonghulu stone pagoda, the four people made a large circle. Along the way, they saw 30 to 40 stone pagodas, but they still didn't find anything. Beside a stream, there was a lush forest. The Red Cloud sect had specially placed some simple stone tables and chairs here for those who climbed up the mountain to rest. The group rested here for the time being. There were more than a few people under the tree beside the stream. But when cultivators went out, most of them were cautious and stayed far away from each other. They lowered their voices and conversed with their companions, so the environment wasn't too noisy. Yang Fanshan took out the immortal fruits he had bought on the ferry. He washed them in the stream and placed them on the stone table. "Your Excellency Qin Yu, Madam, please have some fruits to quench your thirst. I feel very sorry for making you two suffer like this." Qin Yu smiled. "Sir Yang is too polite. Since this is a transaction, this is what I should do." "Kacha!" Beside him, little Midi casually picked up a fruit and took a bite. She looked at Yang Fanshan and then at Qin Yu and couldn't help but reveal a look of disdain. "Look, in terms of eyesight and manners, you are far inferior." Qin Yu was left scratching his head. Yang Fanshan coughed. "I just saw a stone pagoda downstream from here. It's very close. You two can rest here for the time being. I will go take a look." He cupped his hands together and left. Old exalted Jin Shin hurriedly followed. Yang Fanshan dodged as soon as he saw the situation turn bad. He certainly didn't want to stay behind, lest he be caught in the crossfire. Qin Yu faintly smiled. "This Sir Yang is indeed a smart person." Little Midi nodded. "At least you have some self-awareness." Qin Yu revealed a helpless expression. He picked up a fruit. The taste wasn't bad. It seemed similar to the ones on the Blue Rain Sect's ferry. He casually swept his eyes around and suddenly frowned. He didn't say anything, and his expression became tranquil once more. But soon, a strange expression appeared on Qin Yu's face. He didn't say anything, but the other party actually walked over on their own initiative. Although the bamboo hat was deliberately looking ahead, as if he were just passing by, this sort of disguise was far too crude for Qin Yu. He could see through it at a glance. "We met in front of that Tonghulu pagoda just now. That old man is not a good person. You'd better leave Mount Doda as soon as possible to avoid being implicated." After speaking in a low voice, the bamboo hat woman quickly walked away, leaving behind Qin Yu frowning, his expression becoming increasingly strange. As for little Ro, her expression did not change at all. A moment later, Yang Fanshan returned with a face full of suppressed joy. Found it. The pagoda guardian who had made a deal with the Yang family was actually in this stone pagoda by the stream. Little Meat raised her head and glanced at the stone tower by the stream. She stood up and said, "Then let's go." Chinyu coughed. "I'm a bit tired, so I'll rest here for a moment. Madam, you can follow me." Little Meaty glanced at him, and the corners of her mouth curled into a mocking smile. However, she did not say anything, and directly walked towards the stone tower. Yang Fan's Han bowed to Chinyu and hurriedly followed behind. Chinyu rubbed his nose, a helpless smile on his lips. Indeed, when he was with Meaty, there was no way he could hide anything. However, you didn't object to it. Not objecting meant that he agreed. Thinking of this, Chinyu smiled. He flicked his sleeves and put away the unfinished fruits on the table. These were things that Little Meat liked to eat. He couldn't let others take advantage of him. Then he stood up and walked deeper into the forest by the stream. "You too, please wait a moment." Looking at the bamboo hat woman chasing after them, the man and woman turned and stopped. Their eyes were icy cold and their faces filled with vigilance. Luckily, when there was still some distance between them, the bamboo hat woman stopped, allowing the two to relax a little. The female cultivator coldly said, "What business does fellow Taoist have?" The bamboo hat woman waved her hand. "Don't misunderstand. I have no ill intentions towards you. I only chased after you to remind you that the sloppy old man from before is a fierce cultivator. He seems to have ulterior motives towards you too, so I ask you to be careful. If possible, it would be best if you send a message to your sect master or family elders to come to Dupta Mountain to pick you up so that no accidents occur." The complexions of the two people changed. The male cultivator stepped forwards and cupped his hands together. "Thank you for the reminder. We understand." The bamboo hat woman nodded. "That's good. I will bid my farewells then." She turned and left. After confirming that the bamboo hat woman had indeed left, the two disciples from the same sect showed a dignified expression. "Junior brother, your intuition is correct. There is indeed trouble." The man nodded. "Senior sister, we will immediately send a message to Master and ask him to leave. This trip will take us away from Dupta Mountain. There is no need to say anything else. Master will naturally understand." The female cultivator nodded. The two hurriedly left and arrived at the foot of the mountain where the Red Cloud sect had specially set up a message. After branding the message, they activated the message plate and flew away. After finishing this matter, the two didn't go up the mountain again. Instead, they went straight to the foot of the mountain to find an immortal inn opened by the Red Cloud sect and checked in. Spending a sum of money was nothing. Even though they knew they would be ripped off, the advantage was safety. Just as the two people smoothly checked into the Red Cloud sect's immortal inn, an inconspicuous black gas flew out from the jade hairpin on the female cultivator's head and directly disappeared. On Dupta Mountain, under a big tree, the sloppy old man sitting cross-legged suddenly snorted angrily. He opened his eyes, and a sharp light surged out. "What a meddlesome little hussy! You ruined this old man's layout. You deserve to die 10,000 times." He got up and walked away. His speed was very fast, as if he could lock on to his target from afar. Soon, he found the young woman wearing a bamboo hat. "Little girl, when you went out to travel Jianghu, didn't any of the masters in your family remind you that a loose tongue can cause trouble?" With a sneer, the sloppy old man blocked the way. His eyes were like those of a wild beast. The bamboo hat woman was obviously startled. She took 2 steps back and said in a slightly panicked tone, "What are you talking about? I don't understand a word. But I warn you, this is the Red Cloud sect's territory. No one can mess around here. Otherwise, they won't just stand by and watch." The sloppy old man grinned. This old man can't afford to provoke the Red Cloud sect. "But I want to see how a little girl like you can let them know." The voice stopped abruptly. The sloppy old man frowned and glanced behind him. "Little girl, you're lucky." "Humph. The bamboo hat woman's heart skipped a beat. She bit her lip and turned to leave. She ran far away before she patted her chest and sighed. She thought to herself that it was really scary. The look in that old man's eyes was too scary. She almost cried. Sure enough, she had to listen to the old ancestor's words. In the future, she must control herself and not meddle in other people's business. And, at least for a month. Yes, that's it. The sloppy old man turned around and looked at a big tree. He sneered. You wanted to save someone. Now that you've achieved your goal, why are you still here? Do you want this old man to send you off? A figure flashed under the tree. Chin stepped out and said indifferently, You're a dignified sovereign. Why are you making things difficult for a little girl? The sloppy old man frowned. You can see through this old man's depth, but you still dare to stay here. It seems that this early-stage sovereign realm isn't ordinary. Or do you think that early-stage sovereign realm is enough on this Duo-Ta mountain? Do you think this old man won't dare to act rashly? Chin, you lifted a hand and pointed a finger forward. With a light popping sound, a mass of black gas appeared and was smashed to pieces. It seems that you don't want to be merciful. He took a step forward. The sloppy old man's face changed dramatically. His eyes widened in shock. Emperor Realm. Without any hesitation, he took a step forward and soared into the sky. He didn't care if this would anger the Red Cloud sect. As for kneeling and begging for mercy, the fact that he dared to make a move against an Emperor Realm cultivator meant that he was destined to die. The old man didn't have the slightest bit of hope in his heart, even if the Emperor Realm expert in front of him looked different. But soon, the sloppy old man's face was filled with despair. It was as if he had sunk into a swamp. He couldn't move at all. Endless terrifying pressure swept towards him from all directions, suppressing him like a fish on a chopping board. Lord, spare me! A muffled sound rang in the middle of the sloppy old man's sentence. The space between his eyebrows shattered, and a transparent round hole appeared. The light in his eyes dimmed, and the expression on his face became more and more terrified and desperate. Following that, the sloppy old man's soul shattered as well. A sovereign realm expert died on the spot just like that. Chin Yu raised his hand and grasped the air. 2 storage treasures fell into his hand. With a flick of his sleeve, the old man's body turned into dust. He looked up and saw a figure above him. The anger on his face froze, and his expression was particularly interesting. When he saw Chin Yu looking at him, his body trembled. He quickly landed on the ground and bowed respectfully. Chief Elder of the Red Cloud sect, Zhang Yuanji greets you, Lord. That's right, the Red Cloud sect had an iron law. In order to ensure the safety of Mount Duo-Ta, any cultivator who ascended the mountain was not allowed to fight. Otherwise, it would be regarded as the greatest provocation to the Red Cloud sect and would be severely punished. But this matter also depended on who it was, the person in front of him. Unless Zhang Yuanji was crazy and wanted to bring disaster to the Red Cloud sect, he wouldn't enforce the law impartially. He wasn't a fool. He could create a small world with a single thought and become the master of the heavens. He could suppress a sovereign realm expert to the point where they couldn't resist and instantly kill them. Emperor Realm. This was the heaven-defying means of an Emperor Realm master. Such a person ascending Mount Duo-Ta was giving the Red Cloud sect a lot of face. Forget about killing a few people. Even if he trampled half of Mount Duo-Ta with 1 foot, so what? Even if the sect leader came, he would give a thumbs up and praise the Emperor Realm Master for trampling on Mount Duo-Ta. Chin, you didn't know that the Red Cloud sect elder in front of him regarded him as an Emperor Realm Master, but he could guess the general meaning. As the saying goes, the less trouble, the better. I didn't say anything. What you think is your own problem. Today, because of an old friend, I took action on Mount Duo-Ta. I have no intention of targeting the Red Cloud sect. This sentence was like drinking a bowl of cold mung bean soup in the hottest days of summer. Zhang Yuanji felt refreshed and refreshed from head to toe. He heaved a sigh of relief. That's right. What he was most afraid of was that the Emperor Realm Master had a problem with the Red Cloud sect and would find an excuse to attack them. What could he do? The worst-case scenario didn't happen. Moreover, from his tone, the Emperor Realm Master in front of him was easy to talk to. Zhang Yuanji spoke respectfully. May I know if Lord's matter has been resolved? If not, the Red Cloud sect is willing to listen to your orders. Qin Yu said, Everything is fine now. You may leave. Don't reveal a word about my whereabouts. Rest assured, Lord. Qin Yu turned and left, dispelling the small world. His steps were neither fast nor slow, and he walked far away. When he was sure that the chief elder hadn't probed him, he let out a breath, his face pale. Killing a sovereign realm master in an instant might seem impressive, but in reality, he had consumed a lot of energy. But the effect was not bad. The dignified chief elder of the Central Wasteland Divine Prefecture, a peak sovereign realm master, shivered in fear. This feeling was exhilarating. Behind him, Zhang Yuanji wiped the cold sweat from his forehead as he watched the Emperor Realm Master leave. After some hesitation, he decided to keep this matter to himself. At most, he would wait for the sect leader to come out of seclusion and tell him. Otherwise, he would be courting death if he didn't take the Emperor Realm Master's word seriously. Zhang Yuanji took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. He felt that he and the entire Red Cloud sect had survived a great calamity. The so-called peak sovereign realm seemed to be only a step away from the Emperor realm. But this step was like the difference between heaven and earth. The peak sovereign realm was divided into 3 levels: heaven, earth, and man. Only by transforming into the heavens, gathering spirit energy into the earth, and cultivating oneself into a man could one touch the threshold of the celestial being realm, and then have a chance to step into the Emperor realm. But it was only a sliver of a chance. In the Central Wasteland Divine Prefecture, saints were still considered powerful figures, but they had far more sovereigns than the other desolate regions. Peak sovereigns took a considerable amount of time to reach the sovereign realm because of the large number of realms they had. But Emperor Realm? That's right, they had more Emperor Realm Masters than the other desolate regions combined. But compared to the vastness of the Central Wasteland Divine Prefecture, Emperor Realm Masters were few and far between. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were as rare as phoenix feathers, unicorn horns, and dragon's head and tail were nowhere to be seen. Today's Sovereign Realm Master was the only one Zhang Yuanji had ever seen in his life. After his initial shock, he felt a trace of regret. If he could spread the news that an Emperor Realm Master had come to Mount Duta today, not only would the Red Cloud sect's wealth increase, but they would also be able to pull off a frightening tiger skin. The sect master wouldn't have to worry about eating and sleeping every day just because the sect was wealthy. He was afraid that one day he would be killed and eaten. Qin Yu's expression returned to normal when he returned to the riverside, at least on the surface. After arranging the fruits, he sat down on a stone chair and let out a light breath. If the bamboo hat female cultivator hadn't come here and specifically warned him, he wouldn't have done anything even if he had sensed something was wrong. Therefore, although the peck and drink seemed predestined, there was karma involved. Closing his eyes, Qin Yu calmed his mind and unknowingly fell into a deep sleep. Swoosh! The meaty figure appeared next to Qin Yu. She looked down and couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. It seemed that things were a bit out of her expectations. She raised her head and looked at a certain spot on Mount Duta. After thinking for a moment, she said indifferently, "Consider yourself lucky." Then, she turned around and sat down next to Qin Yu. Yang Fanshan and Jin Shin appeared not far away. For some reason, their hearts trembled when they saw the scene in front of them, and they stopped in their tracks. After a moment's hesitation, the 2 of them walked to another part of the riverside. The other cultivators who had been sitting at the surrounding stone tables all looked at each other. then at each other, and then at the man and woman sitting at the stone table. They seemed to be frightened, and they hurriedly got up and left. Chapter 1666. After that, he waited for an entire day and night. Qin Yu still hadn't woken up. As for the wooden climbing tokens of Mount Duta, they each had a time limit. The old exalted reminded him in a low voice. Yang Fan's Han revealed a grateful expression and hurried away. He found a red cloud sect disciple and handed over the black gold coins once more. Because he wasn't sure how long Qin Yu would sleep for, Yang Fan's Han left behind a handful of black gold coins. After agreeing to a refund, he stood up and left. Another 2 days passed. Qin Yu stirred. He slowly opened his eyes and looked at Meaty in front of him. He subconsciously asked, "Is it done?" Meaty nodded. "It's done." Sensing that the danger signal had been lifted, Yang Fan's Han waited for a moment and then brought the old exalted back. He cupped his hands together and bowed. "Congratulations!" A powerful cultivator naturally wouldn't fall asleep for no reason. Moreover, he slept for 3 days and 3 nights. Yang Fanshan's eyes lit up with envy, but he didn't say anything. He didn't even mention Qin Yu's name. The old exalted looked at Yang Fan's Han in front of him and suddenly realized. From the very start, he had known all of this. He knew that it wasn't a coincidence, but he had chosen to gamble. He had bet his life on a chance to turn things around and survive. A life to gamble. It turned out that he had underestimated this young master of the Yang family. The old exalted couldn't help but reveal a complex expression. Qin Yu had figured out why he had fallen asleep for 3 days. However, he couldn't sense anything different about himself. Well, at most, his connection with the great heaven and earth net seemed to have become much clearer. He glanced at Meaty. She had been sitting at the side the entire time. Since she hadn't interrupted him, there shouldn't be any problems. "Come with me to a place." Meaty stood up and walked away. Yang Fan's Han and the old exalted elder had good eyesight and stayed where they were. Qin Yu faintly smiled, and the two of them walked upstream. "Did you have some harvest this time? It really makes me envious." Yang Fan's Han said in a soft voice, a look of emotion on his face. The old exalted nodded. "That's right. Mount Duta does have lucky chances, but there won't be a single lucky one for dozens of years." After a moment of hesitation, the old exalted man bowed. "Young master," this old man acted wisely and didn't warn you. "I hope you don't take offense." Yang Fan's Han smiled and shook his head. "It's only human nature. Old exalted, there is no need to worry about it. Moreover, you have given me many reminders along the way. I will always remember them." Perhaps there were times when the experienced Jianghu people were not sharp, but they still had a good eye for people. He might not be able to see through everything, but it wasn't difficult for him to tell if a person was sincere or not when facing them face to face. Thus, the old exalted Jinshin revealed an emotional expression. He cupped his hands together, and his recognition of Yang Fan's Han increased. This time, as long as he survived this disaster, he would definitely have a place in the Yang family in the future. Perhaps he could really make a comeback, inherit the will of the old master, and become the new head of the Yang family. Following the stream, Little Meat led the way, and Qin Yu followed behind. The two of them didn't speak, but the atmosphere wasn't heavy. As the saying goes, being silent and deep is congealing. This is because the relationship between them is not close enough. Along the way, they passed by some stone pagodas. Little Meat didn't stop at all until they arrived at the source of the stream. There was a low and lonely stone pagoda in the middle of a field of rubble, and beneath the rubble was a crack in the earth. Spring water gushed out, flowing downwards until it became a stream. Little Meat stopped. She pointed a finger. "Qin Yu, bow to this pagoda. Cupping your hands together is enough. It won't be able to withstand it if it's too big." Qin Yu had a thoughtful look on his face. He stepped forwards and cupped his hands together. His actions were respectful. Little Meat frowned, but didn't say anything. In fact, in her opinion, This bow was far too heavy. She turned and walked down the mountain. She didn't explain anything to Chinyu, as if she had come all this way just to have him bow to her. Chinyu stood up. He glanced at the unknown stone pagoda in the middle of the rubble and then followed Little Meat down the mountain. After a moment of silence, Little Meat suddenly said, "Chinyu, do you really believe in me now? I told you not to ask, but you really managed to endure it." Chinyu smiled. "We've been friends through life and death together. If even you don't dare to believe in me, then my life would be too tiring." Little Meat curled her lips. "That's because you lack experience and don't know the true dangers of the world. To use self-harm to trick you, it must be extremely simple." Chinyu shook his head. "That's not necessarily true." He lifted a hand and pointed to his own eyes. "I think that my eyes are quite accurate when looking at people." This could be considered a very subtle flattery. Little Meat's lips curved up before she composed herself. After several more breaths of silence, she slowly said, "The reason I helped Yang Fan's Han is because this is one of the contents of my deal with Su Zhou. In the Jade Gate Pass, the sword Cultivator Wei Han is a good chess piece. That night I gave him a sword. Although it restricted his future, it is indeed very suitable for his aptitude. In the future, when he completely controls it, it will probably be useful. Baiji, the reason I had her go to Infinite Temple is because that old Taoist line of swordsmanship is nearly tailor-made for her. If she succeeds in her cultivation, not only can she repair her hidden injuries, but she can also take another step forward. As for what her future achievements are, that will depend on her own good fortune." A bit of warmth appeared in Chinyu's eyes. He looked at her back and said, "You don't need to explain these things to me." After a brief silence, Little Meat asked, "Really?" Chinyu coughed and rubbed his nose. "Of course, if you want to, you can tell me about it in the future. Perhaps I can even help you with some references. For instance, I can see that Chinyu's name isn't too bad." Little Meat turned and glanced at Chinyu. "That name is of course excellent. It cuts off at least 30% of his escape routes. But the reason I'm telling you this is not because I want you to have a better impression of me or because I need you to help me fill in the gaps. This is because I am very experienced in doing these things, and I am also very skilled at them. I am more skilled than 100 Chinyus added together." She was clearly blowing her own trumpet, but for some reason, when she said it, it inexplicably sounded believable. Moreover, wasn't I being despised and also ridiculed? As expected, warmth and affection never suited Little Meat. Chinyu rubbed his face and nodded, but he definitely wouldn't take back what he'd just said. Curiosity was something that could be suppressed through cultivation, but it was still a very irritating thing. After a few more steps, Little Meat continued, "I'm telling you these things to remind you that I've always been helping you accumulate chess pieces. This is because the situation you will face in the future is far more difficult than you can imagine, 100 times more arduous. You may die, and the possibility is very high. I can't be sure that everything I'm doing now will help you survive, but I will do my best and raise the possibility to the highest. So if you are willing to believe in me, keep this trust, because the road ahead is still very long." Returning to the stream, the group of 4 didn't delay any longer and went straight down the mountain. After returning the remaining black gold coins, the 4 registered wooden tablets were now handed over to Chinyu. He smiled at Yang Fan's Han to express his gratitude, causing the latter's smile to become even more radiant. If Chinyu hadn't stopped him, he would have turned around to find a Red Cloud sect disciple and buy a pile of tablets for him. A moment later, the Red Cloud sect's chief elder, Liu Enji, who'd purposely withdrawn his senses and didn't dare to probe the Emperor Realm Master, appeared out of thin air at the mountain gate. The disciples guarding the mountain hurriedly bowed. "Greetings, Chief Elder." Liu Enji waved his hand and let them go about their own business. His eyes sneaked a few glances at the 4 figures that were already far away, and he let out a long sigh from the bottom of his heart. Although he'd felt a bit regretful that day, his heart had been on edge when he discovered that Chinyu and the others had stayed on the mountain all this time, especially since the sect master was in closed-door cultivation and he didn't even have someone to share his burden with. It was incomparably torturous. An emperor realm master and his wife. Although he didn't know what realm they were at, Liuanji couldn't help but sneak a peek 2 days ago and almost went blind on the spot. Fortunately, no accidents had happened. Otherwise, he would have had no choice but to commit suicide as an apology and kowtow to the ancestors. If these two were to cause any trouble, even if it was just a quarrel, they could raze the entire Mount Duoda to the ground. How could he not be afraid? It's good that they're gone. I can't take advantage of them, but at least I don't have to be afraid. It was at this time that the Red Cloud sect's chief elder, who had overseen Mount Duoda for many years and knew this place like the back of his hand, suddenly turned around and looked at the mountain peak. He didn't discover anything, but he could vaguely feel that something was different. In a place where Liuanji's eyes couldn't reach, the stone pagoda in the middle of the pebbles where the stream originated was glowing with a precious light. A figure rose from the stone pagoda. His face was so blurry that he couldn't see it clearly, but a refreshing aura emanated from his body. His eyes were filled with gratitude as he bowed in the direction the four had left in, as if returning Chinyu's previous bow, because Little Meat was right. He really couldn't bear it. At the foot of the mountain, Chinyu, who was about to enter the dock, suddenly sensed something and turned around to see the figure of a scholar. The reason why he said he was a scholar was because he could see the strong, scholarly aura around him at a glance. He seemed like a gentleman. This person smiled warmly and bowed from afar before vanishing from sight. Chinyu blinked and turned to look at Little Meat. She expressionlessly said, "At least he understands etiquette and didn't dare to accept your bow. Otherwise, today's good fortune will be a disaster in the future." He didn't understand what she was saying, but there was one thing he was sure of. This wasn't an illusion. Chinyu thought for a moment and then faintly smiled, not saying anything else. Mount Duoda was a famous tourist destination and there were many ferries coming and going. The old exalted elder didn't need to expend much effort to find a ferry that would depart tomorrow. There wasn't a need to make a detour. They just happened to pass by a small city that bordered Jade Gate Pass and the Langur region. They would stop there for a day to rest and reorganize. It wasn't that the various ferries didn't want to bring their guests to enjoy the scenery of Jade Gate Pass and the 3 mountains and 6 rivers, and also to see the majestic border pass. But it was because the Great Qin Empire had strict orders that ferries were not allowed to enter the borders of the 4 realms. This was to guard against those who wanted to use the loopholes of the ferries to find a chance to destroy the border pass. For tens of thousands of years, the central wasteland divine continent had been ruled by the Qin family. But that didn't mean that there weren't any enemies within the territories they ruled. For instance, the monster race that was outwardly submissive but inwardly unconvinced. There were also the ancient remnant races that were becoming increasingly rare but had never truly disappeared. Yang Fan's Han went to buy a ticket. When he returned, he had an apologetic look on his face. There were far too many people on Mount Duoda and they were in a rush, so this was the only ferry they could choose from. As for the top floor of the ship, it had already been reserved. Even if they increased the price this time, it wouldn't be of much use. Chinyu smiled, indicating that it didn't matter. It was only a few days. They could endure it for a bit. Little Meat didn't care about these things at all. In particular, Yang Fan's Han was a very sensible person. She had bought many immortal fruits along the way. With a single glance, she could tell that these were all things she liked to eat. Little Meat couldn't help but consider whether or not she should use her official position for private gain and keep Yang Fan's Han by her side. That way, she would definitely have a comfortable life in the future. By now, Chinyu had a considerable understanding of Little Meat. He glanced at her complexion and could roughly guess what she was thinking. He glanced at the smiling Yang Fan's Han from the corner of his eye. He thought to himself, "You brat, you had best not be so considerate anymore. Otherwise, if you couldn't even cry in the future, you would just be asking for it." If Yang Fan's Han were to know that his attempt to curry favor with Little Meat had nearly reduced him to a servant boy that was ordered around in the future, he would definitely break out in a cold sweat. He would lift his hand and slap himself 17 or 18 times across the face. Luckily, Little Meat hadn't forgotten about the important matters at hand. Yang Fan's Han had already been reserved. Unless she was willing to toss him around a bit more, he wasn't someone she could forcibly occupy. She could only suppress this thought with a bit of regret. The next day, the group of 4 smoothly boarded the ferry and departed. Chapter 1667. There were no walls in this world that didn't have cracks. What happened at Bull Do Mountain had been exposed. Before, it was said that the establishment of the Jade Gate Pass required the support of the powerful earth vein beneath Bull Do Mountain. Although this earth vein didn't completely support the Jade Gate Pass, it was still an important link. Once it was lost, it might be fine for a short period of time. But as time passed, it would be like a 1,000-mile dam collapsing under an ant's nest. Finally, it would lead to an unsalvageable situation. As the guardian of the Jade Gate Pass, Great General Zhao Yuan had an unshirkable responsibility for this matter. So today he had appeared at the peak of Bull Do Mountain. Looking down at the mountain, Zhao Yuan couldn't help but frown. He still couldn't figure out just who had the ability to deceive the heavens and take away the monster soul from the earth vein within the boundaries of the Jade Gate Pass. Not only did this have high requirements for the person who did this, but the earth ox monster soul had to be willing. Could it be a supreme elder of the monster race? But these stray dogs had lived with their tails between their legs. Did they really have the courage to do this? Weren't they afraid of being punished by the great Qin Empire? Shua, another figure, appeared in the air. His expression was calm and his eyes indifferent. Great General, although it's not too late to mend the pen after the sheep is lost, the sooner the better. After all, for every breath of time we delay, the foundation of the Jade Gate Pass will suffer a bit more damage. He wore a Taoist robe and had white hair. His back was slightly curled up and he seemed listless, like a country bumpkin sunbathing beneath the warm sun. Zhao Yuan coldly snorted. He was dissatisfied with the Taoist's urging, but he didn't do anything else. No matter how sickly the imperial scholar of the great Qin Empire looked, he absolutely could not be offended. Regarding this, his family's old man had given him a stern warning. Although it was only once, it was enough for Zhao Yuan. He stepped forward, and endless light gushed out from the ground. A giant armored beast appeared, respectfully prostrating itself on the ground to express its awe towards Zhao Yuan. Looking at this monster beast that had followed him for nearly 100 years, Zhao Yuan expressionlessly slammed his palm down. Puff! With a dull thud, the giant beast's head exploded and its massive body crashed to the ground. The monster's soul flew out, its eyes filled with pain and unwillingness. Zhao Yuan didn't even look at it. He grabbed the monster soul and smashed it into the ground, forcefully sending it into the earth vein beneath Bull Do Mountain. The behemoth's corpse quickly melted and was absorbed by the earth. All that was left behind was the scarred armor that covered its body. With a flick of his sleeve, Zhao Yuan kept the armor and said, "Is the imperial advisor satisfied?" The sickly Taoist glanced at him and nodded with a smile. "Great General, you are decisive. I will report this to His Majesty. In that case, I'll take my leave first." Zhao Yuan shot up into the sky, stirring up clouds and lightning along the way as he returned to the Jade Gate Pass. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. Killing the giant beast and taking its soul to stabilize the earth veins was His Majesty's warning to him. Otherwise, it would not be difficult to find a replacement for Great General Zhao Yuan. There was no need for him to be in such a sorry state. This was the main reason why Zhao Yuan was in such a bad mood. Just who was it that had stolen the demon soul from under Nyo Do Mountain? He would never let this matter rest. The imperial advisor remained on the mountain peak. He watched as the great general left and shook his head. The young are full of vigor, He sighed. He turned and held his hands behind his back, looking down at Nyodo Mountain beneath his feet. Right now, his eyes were filled with vibrant colors. It was as if there was a world hidden in them that no one knew about. But in the end, the Imperial advisor still came up with nothing. The person who had attacked had a high cultivation, and their methods were profound, leaving one in deep admiration. With this cultivation, the demon soul within the earth veins didn't dare to resist. This was something that couldn't be any simpler. Thus, the Imperial advisor didn't suspect the monster race at all. After 10,000 years of killing, this was one reason. The other reason was that the Imperial advisor felt that even if the guardian of the monster pond, Goddess Qingxin, personally came, she still wouldn't be able to escape his eyes. To say that he looked down on the current, abject monster race was a bit too direct, but in reality this was indeed the case. Ancient remnant humans? The Imperial advisor whispered, a thoughtful look on his face. If it really was them, then he had to be careful. These fellows that hid in all directions wouldn't easily make a move. Once they appeared, they would surely have other intentions. It was best not to provoke any accidents. If His Majesty was angered, then even he, the Imperial advisor, would find it difficult to endure. After all, accompanying a ruler was like accompanying a tiger. This saying really wasn't wrong. And at this time, 10,000 miles away from Nyodo Mountain, a ferry was sailing through the clouds. Little Meat now had a hobby of eating fruits. What she liked to do the most every day was to move a chair and sit in the corridor in front of her house. She would eat fruits while admiring the sea of clouds. As for nighttime, she would of course look at the starry sky. Others would have long since grown tired of these repetitive things, but she would always look at them with keen interest. A beautiful girl, cough, cough, this wasn't too much to say. In particular, after this mysterious existence entered Little Meat's body, her delicate and shy facial features and her cold and distant demeanor fused together, making her all the more eye-catching. There was an endless stream of people trying to strike up a conversation with her. But after just a day, no one dared to speak any more nonsense. Each and every one of them acted as if they had seen a ghost. Their faces paled, and they couldn't help but avoid her. There was a direct disciple of a sect who seemed to be the son of some sect master. After being startled, an elder of the sect, who knew whether it was because he was bursting with a sense of responsibility or because he wanted to take this chance to curry favor with him, but he took a firm stance and demanded justice from Little Meat. But in the end, he was blocked by this son of the sect master. His face was deathly pale, and he clenched his teeth and roared in Qin Yu's ear. Qin Yu was a bit far away, so he only paid attention to this and didn't pay too much attention to it. He only faintly heard that if you want to seek death, don't drag us down with you. Qin Yu deeply agreed. He thought that this was truly worthy of being the son of the sect master. Although his cultivation was a bit lacking, his eyesight was quite good. Then that night, it was unknown what sort of communication the group made with the fairy, but they left that very night, riding the winds and flying far away. After this matter, Little Meat's ominous reputation spread far and wide, and no one dared to provoke her any more. But it wasn't without harvests. The fairy realized that the guests living in ordinary rooms weren't ordinary at all. They sent out a steward who vaguely offered to change the guests to better rooms for free. The young sect master and his group fled in the middle of the night, so there just happened to be some empty rooms on the top floor. Since they had nothing better to do, they might even be able to pull in some favors. Yang Fanshan didn't dare to rashly disturb Qin Yu's cultivation. He looked into the distance at Little Meat, who was gazing at the sea of clouds. After a moment of thought, he chose to refuse. The fairy steward didn't say much. He smiled and bid his farewells. This was originally something he had done along the way, so it was reasonable that Little Meat didn't want to accept. But afterwards, Little Meat bought all sorts of immortal fruits from the fairy, and the price was much cheaper. It couldn't be said that she lost money, but she definitely didn't earn much. This could be considered helping Yang Fanshan save a great deal of money on his wallet. The old, exalted, cautiously reminded him that the fairy was only doing this to express their apology. After all, the madam had been harassed in their territory, and if they were to blindly refuse, it would instead cause the fairy to feel uneasy. It was better to pretend they didn't know anything. Yang Fan's Han deeply agreed with this and expressed his thanks to the old exalted. For the next several days, the journey was smooth. The fairy arrived at a small place called Sheephorn City at the border of Jade Gate Pass. The reason they stopped here was because this place was deep underground. Here, there was a kind of natural sheep horn ore. It was a good refining material in itself. The most mysterious part was that this type of sheep horn stone was wrapped in a thick layer of stone that naturally isolated divine sense. Only after opening it would one know what the quality of the ore was like. This was a true gambling method of immortals. Large numbers of cultivators disembarked from the ship, and most of them would buy 1 or 2 pieces to gamble on their luck. There was really someone who used a black gold coin to buy an ordinary-looking sheep horn stone. In the end, after opening it, he made a huge fortune. Of course, such a situation was extremely rare. The group of 4 left the ferry here. Of course, they weren't going to gamble on stones, because if they continued, they would have to take a detour. The ferry steward appeared with a smile. He cupped his hands together and bowed. "Honored guests, I apologize for my poor hospitality before. I ask that you don't take offense." He waved his hand, and 2 cultivators on the ferry came over. They each held a tray with dozens of large and small gray stones placed on it. These are sheep horn stones. They are of extremely ordinary quality, and their value is around 1 or 2 blue gold coins. Honored guests, you can choose one of them. This can be considered a small gift when you leave the ferry, and also a token of my golden Gusek's apology. Yang Fan's Han sighed in amazement. He thought that he had learned something new. It seemed that one could conduct oneself well and be meticulous to such a degree. Indeed, the central desolate divine continent was a land of great heroes, and there was knowledge everywhere. The golden Gusek in front of him was like this, and so was the tower guard who had traded with the Yang family on Mount Duta. As soon as he saw the madam beside him, he decisively abandoned all thoughts of stealing and obediently handed over the items and sent them off. She glanced at the tray in the hands of the 2 golden Gusek cultivators and casually pointed. "I'll take this one." Chin Yu maintained his composure. He stepped forward and took one for her. He also took one from the side and cupped his hands together in thanks. Seeing them take the sheep horn stones, Yang Fan's Han and old exalted Jinshin naturally didn't have any objections. Moreover, to be honest, the feeling of being carefully treated by a central desolate sect was quite good. Now, many cultivators that chose to disembark at the pier looked at the 4 people and subconsciously revealed dignified expressions. Chin Yu handed the sheep horn stone to Little Meat. She twirled it between her fingers, looked down at the ferry, and then turned to leave. The steward watched them leave. Then he returned to the ferry. On this voyage, there was a top-floor room that wasn't open to the public. He knocked on the door. After obtaining permission, he respectfully pushed open the door and entered. "Elder, according to your orders, they have already been sent away." "I understand." Golden Goose Sect Elder Li Yuangui slowly said, his eyebrows furrowed together. The steward hesitated for a moment. "Elder, those 4 guests," he really couldn't understand. With the status of the Golden Goose Sect, even the region lord of the Langya region had to give them sufficient respect. Why would they treat 4 people of unknown origins with such care? When they were on the ferry, it could be said that they were pushing the boat along with the current. But today, when they left the ferry, they took the initiative to deliver the sheep horn stones. Although they really weren't worth much, this attitude damaged the prestige of the Golden Gusect. Li Yuangue shook his head. "The reason I am like this is because of that woman. I cannot see through her. I don't know what kind of person she is, but she is also heading towards Jade Gate Pass. Recently, Great General Zhao Yuan has gone crazy for some reason and stirred up a lot of trouble. There is no harm in being a bit more cautious. The steward thought for a moment and nodded. Elders' thoughts are thorough. After speaking a few more words, he bowed and drew back. The door closed. Li Yuangue turned and continued to look out the window. Subconsciously, he recalled the woman's final glance before she left. Like a vast sea, unfathomably deep. Chapter 1668. The four of them, each holding a sheep horn stone, did not linger in the city for long. After some simple checks, they were allowed to enter the Jade Gate Pass. The reason why they were so perfunctory was probably because the great Qin Empire's army guarding the pass didn't think that anyone would dare to cause trouble in the Jade Gate Pass. After all, great General Zhao Yuan's reputation resounded like thunder throughout the empire. Before entering the Jade Gate Pass, Yang Fan's Han spent 3 silver-speckled copper coins to buy a luxurious carriage from a carriage dealer. This place was quite a distance away from the Jade Gate Pass. Without a ferry, it wouldn't be good for the 2 nobles to spend the night in the open. Yang Fan's Han and Jin Xin drove the carriage together towards Sifting Star Mountain, which was the easternmost of the 3 mountains. Qin Yu began to cultivate as usual. He had spent a great deal of money to buy an immortal carriage. Not only was it fast, but it was also extremely comfortable. He basically didn't feel any bumps, and this was what he was most satisfied with. By the time Qin Yu opened his eyes, the carriage had traveled nearly half the distance. Looking through the window, he could faintly make out the steep outline of sifting mountain that pierced into the skies. However, there was still a long way to go before they could reach the foot of the mountain. Turning around, Qin Yu's eyes fell on Meaty's hand. It was a thumb-sized crimson stone, covered with goat horns. His eyes flashed. He said, "This is the sheep horn stone?" With a flip of his hand, he took out his own piece, and with a slight force in his fingers, it broke into pieces. The stone chips on its surface fell off, revealing the true appearance of the sheep horn stone, which had a few red lines on its surface. Even if one did not know how to appraise it, one could still see that the sheep horn stone in his hand was worlds apart from the one in Little Meat's hand. The corner of Little Meaty's mouth hooked up. "The piece in my hand is worth more than 10,000 pieces in your hand." Qin Yu sighed. "The Golden Gesect is quite generous." Meaty sneered. "If they knew about this, I'm afraid their hearts, livers, spleens, lungs, and kidneys would all shrink together." Qin Yu rubbed his eyebrows. He thought to himself, "My flesh once again has the ability to stand out from the crowd. My ability to pick up scraps is also unrivaled under the heavens." He took another look at the sheep horn stone in Little Meaty's hand. The more he looked at it, the more beautiful it seemed. It was glowing with a faint red light. "Stop looking. I've already made arrangements for this thing. I can't give it to you no matter how much you look at it." Qin Yu's eyebrows shot up. He could see that Ruru was also quite satisfied with this sheep horn stone. This could be seen from the minute expressions on her face and the way she fiddled with it. She actually wanted to give it to someone else. As if sensing his surprise, Little Meaty coldly snorted. She turned her hand and put away the sheep horn stone. Then she glared at Qin Yu, her eyes filled with ill intent. Thus he immediately understood this sheep horn stone was most likely related to the accumulation of chess pieces that Little Meaty had mentioned before. In other words, in the end, it was for his sake that he gave away the sheep horn stone. Meaty's cold snort of dissatisfaction and her grave and stern gaze were all explained. Qin Yu coughed. "The dead are like men, the dead are like men. Cultivate. Call me when we reach the place." He closed his eyes and left. Across from him, Little Meaty clenched her teeth. She raised her hand, then lowered it again. She thought to herself, "I'll remember this for now. When I have the chance in the future, I'll deal with them all together." When she was at the Jade Gate Pass, she had faintly sensed something. After she obtained this peak sheep horn stone, she was basically certain. Since this person had deliberately revealed a trace of his aura, she certainly wouldn't miss it. But there was one thing that Qin Yu was wrong about. The chess pieces this time weren't easy to accumulate. At most, they could be considered cooperating with each other. Little Meaty narrowed her eyes. Those that had the qualifications to cooperate with her definitely weren't ordinary people. She licked the corners of her lips. Her eyes subconsciously revealed a reminiscence and reminiscence. That taste, it was really quite good. They arrived at Star Sifting Mountain. They had galloped all the way here. Even though the horses driving the carriage were endlessly talented, they had nearly reached their limit and had to stop to rest. Yang Fanshan, whose face was covered in dust, knocked on the door respectfully and explained the situation to him. Worried that the two people in the carriage would be dissatisfied, he continued to say, "There is a city at the base of Star Sifting Mountain. After we enter and change horses, we can continue on our way." Qin Yu looked at Little Meaty and smiled. "There's no need to be in such a hurry. We've been rushing all the way here, so let's rest here for the night." Yang Fanshan certainly didn't have any objections to this. The carriage slowed down and entered the city. They found an inn to stay in. When he entered the inn, he discovered that business here was bleak, and there were very few people walking along the long street. His thoughts stirred. He calmly asked a few questions, and the servant leading the way immediately began to complain. Great General Zhao Yuan had recently flown into a thunderous rage. Because he didn't know, he had ordered a thorough investigation of all foreign cultivators within the borders of Jade Gate Pass. During this period of time, a great deal of trouble had occurred. The military had actually managed to find many wanted criminals who had concealed their identities. But during this time, there were also many innocent people who suffered undeserved calamities, causing everyone to panic. The cultivators that came from within and outside of Jade Gate Pass had to admit that they couldn't provoke the great general, so they could only flee in panic lest they encounter an accident. After speaking, the servant realized what he had said. He dryly smiled and looked at the four people behind him. "Honored guests, I was just rambling for a moment and spoke a bit of nonsense. Please don't lower yourself to my level." Qin Yu smiled and nodded. "It's fine. We don't want to speak of this to others. Great General Zhao Yuan. Just who dares to provoke him?" The servant nodded in agreement. He said, "Our great general is indeed the one inside Jade Gate Pass." Seeing the servant give him a thumbs up, Qin Yu glanced at Little Meaty. He didn't have any evidence, but his intuition told him that this matter was related to Little Meaty. For instance, the monster soul from the earth vein that she had stolen from the summit of Bull Battle Mountain. Little Meaty was expressionless. She looked up, the meaning in her eyes clear. "What are you looking at me for?" Qin Yu looked away. Now that he was sure of this, he couldn't help but feel a bit of pressure. The matter at Bull Battle Mountain had alarmed Zhao Yuan so quickly and caused such a ruckus. It was clear that the scope involved was not small. With the Qin Empire's ability, if they locked onto them and returned to the outer reaches of Jade Gate Pass, wouldn't it be walking right into a trap? Little Meaty was indeed strong, and her methods were mysterious and unfathomable. If it was said that she was hiding 800 different skills, Qin Yu wouldn't doubt it. But no matter how strong she was only one person, so there was naturally a limit to her strength. For a single person to fight against an entire country, this was something that was impossible to accomplish, let alone the Qin Empire that ruled over the central, desolate divine continent. Even the Western Desolate couldn't do this. Otherwise, why would Qin Yu need to be so careful and cautious? However, looking at Little Meaty's current expressionless appearance, Qin Yu's thoughts raced, and he calmed down a little. Since she didn't express anything, she naturally had confidence that she could cross the skies and wouldn't be caught by great General Zhao Yuan. But even though he thought this, after assigning the rooms, Qin Yu paused his cultivation. He stood up and knocked on Little Meaty's door, lowering his voice and telling her what he was worried about. Then, facing Little Meaty's gaze, he received a definite answer. He left behind a simple "sorry for disturbing" and turned to leave. If he was despised, then so be it. It was better than having no confidence in himself. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to cultivate with peace of mind. He would only be able to achieve half the results with twice the effort. The night passed peacefully. Looking at the shop owner's expression, he seemed surprised that no troops had come to search tonight. Then he revealed a happy expression. It seemed that great General Zhao Yuan had finally decided to rest for a while. The shop owner nearly cried tears of joy. He was so happy that he almost wanted to give the 4 customers a discount, but in the end he didn't. As the days were difficult, earning a little more was a little more. As the carriage passed through star-sifting mountain, Little Meaty patted the carriage. Yang Fan's Han pulled on the reins, and the carriage immediately stopped. The door of the carriage opened, and Little Meaty stepped out. She looked back and said, "Why are you in a daze? Hurry up and get off." Qin Yu glanced at Yang Fan's Han and the old exalted who had their heads lowered and were motionless. He rubbed his nose, not speaking. For no reason at all, he had been in the middle of cultivating when he was suddenly slapped awake. He nearly choked on his own breath. And most importantly, there was no explanation at all. He had no idea what they were going to do. Little Meaty took the lead and walked towards star-sifting mountain. Qin Yu faintly smiled. "I'll have to trouble you two to wait here for a moment. We'll go up the mountain and enjoy the scenery. We will be back soon." Yang Fan's Han and the old exalted hurriedly expressed that there was no problem. They were both intelligent people. Even an idiot would know that this wasn't the case. But on the surface, they naturally didn't reveal any of this. Star-sifting mountain was extremely high and steep. The mountain terrain was incomparably treacherous. The road up the mountain was daunting. Luckily, after avoiding their line of sight, Little Meaty grabbed Qin Yu. The two of them stepped forwards and appeared atop the mountain summit. Beneath their feet were billowing clouds that surged endlessly. Above their heads, 9 suns illuminated the world. An old man in a straw raincoat was sitting on the edge of a cliff, a bamboo fishing rod in his hands. The fishing line sank into the clouds. It was unknown just what he was fishing for. "You too, the things I am fishing for are the most sensitive. I ask that you do not make any noise, lest I waste another month waiting." The old man didn't turn his head. His calm voice sounded out in their ears. Little Meaty let go of Qin Yu. She took several steps forwards and arrived at the old man's side. "Do things like cloud sea flying fish still exist?" The old man smiled. "There are very few left. It's only because this mountain is high enough and they have hidden themselves well that they have been able to multiply until now. Your bait is quite good. You should be able to obtain some harvests, but I don't have the time to waste with you." Little Meaty lifted a hand and the sheep-horn stone appeared in her palm. The old man hesitated for a moment. He put down the fishing rod and cupped his hands together. "Then let's get down to business first. Let's take a few steps back, lest we startle the schools of fish." Little Meaty turned and walked away. Qin Yu was expressionless. He tried his best not to reveal any strange expression. This was because this old man under the straw raincoat was far too strange. Between his eyebrows there was actually a third eye. Even though it was closed, it still gave Qin Yu a terrifying feeling. It was like as if as long as this eye opened, despair and destruction would descend. The old man glanced at Qin Yu. He faintly smiled and nodded in greeting. Little Meaty had no expression. "He is one of my people." The old man thought for a moment and then cupped his hands together. Little Meaty's complexion relaxed a little. Qin Yu bowed in return, a strange expression on his face. He thought that these words were a bit inappropriate. Then, as Little Meaty and the old man spoke, Qin Yu was present the entire time. He was right beside them and could clearly see their mouths open and close, as well as the minute expressions on their faces. But he couldn't hear anything at all. He had no idea what they were talking about. It was likely that these things weren't suitable for him to know right now. In the end, the old man frowned. After thinking for a long time, he slowly nodded, most likely agreeing to Little Meaty's request. The invisible barrier instantly vanished and little Meaty's voice sounded out. Then let's do it for now. She hesitated for a moment. She looked at Chinyu and said, I will say it again. He is one of my people. The old man's expression didn't change. He looked at Chinyu once more. This time his gaze was much deeper, as if he wanted to brand his entire person into his mind. Little Meaty grabbed Chinyu. Then she stepped forwards and vanished from sight. The old man looked at the place where the two disappeared. Then he looked down at the sheep horn stone that had returned to his hand. After a long time, he gently sighed. Cooperating with this person was no different from asking a tiger for its skin. Perhaps one day he would end up without even a corpse remaining. After all, these things had happened more than once or twice in the distant past. But the situation was stronger than the people. There were fewer and fewer ancient survivors. If they didn't do anything, there really was a chance that their bloodline would be severed. Suddenly, the old man's figure flashed. He appeared at the edge of the cliff. He grabbed the fishing rod and pulled upwards. The entire sea of clouds in front of him began to violently shake, like billowing waves in a river. The fishing line was pulled taut, emitting faint cracking sounds. The old man frowned. He sighed. Think about it carefully. If you cause too much of a disturbance and are discovered by others, the entire school of fish will suffer a calamity. After a moment of silence, a deep roar filled with sorrow echoed out from the sea of clouds. The fishing line was instantly pulled back. A palm-sized fish was pulled out from the sea of clouds. Its entire body was snow white and it had two cicada-like wings on its back. It was hard to imagine that this little fish in front of them actually had the strength to stir up the entire sea of clouds. The old man reached out a hand and caught the fish. He sighed with emotion. In order to protect your people, you were willing to give up your life. But isn't it the same for me? From this aspect, you and I can be said to be in the same boat. He opened his mouth, wanting to eat the flying cloud sea fish. He had sat here for an entire month. Wasn't it all in order to eat his fill? Sympathy was sympathy, sorrow was sorrow, but none of this could fill one's stomach. So, this was something that couldn't be pretentious. But at this time the old man stiffened. A bitter expression crossed his face. He stared at the flying cloud sea fish near his mouth, his eyes full of reluctance. After a moment of hesitation, he let out a deep sigh. He lifted his hand and tossed the flying cloud sea fish out into the clouds. At the base of the mountain, little Meaty was walking towards the carriage with Chinyu. She suddenly looked up. Little fellow, you're quite smart. A fish flapped its wings and quietly appeared in front of them. Chinyu thought that this was the flying cloud sea fish that little Meaty mentioned before. It seemed quite exquisite. Little Meaty reached out a hand and the flying fish fell into her palm. Its body rapidly faded away, turning into a water droplet pattern on her fair skin. She glanced at Chinyu and said, Aren't you curious about what he said just now? Chinyu nodded without hesitation. Little Meaty thought for a moment and then said, The old man on the mountain is an ancient remnant. Chapter 1669. Within Jade Gate Pass, there were 3 mountains and 6 rivers. One of them was called the Longsong River, and it divided this pass into 2 regions. Its position was between Sifting Star and Fighting Bull Mountain. When Little Meaty had taken action, she had brought him through space and just happened to pass through this region. But now, a 4-person carriage was driving along the banks of the Longsong River. They could hear the deafening rumbling of the river in their ears. Little Meaty looked out the window at the roaring river. She suddenly frowned. Whoosh! With the sound of breaking air, a figure landed in front of the carriage, blocking its path. Stop! Yong Fanshan pulled on the reins. He felt that this person was a bit familiar. He immediately remembered that he had seen this woman on Mount Duta. After a moment of hesitation, he cupped his hands together and said, May I ask why Miss has stopped us? The bamboo hat woman lightly coughed. She pointed towards the river. Recently, Great General Zhao Yuan has been hunting down some criminal. The great monster hiding at the bottom of the river has seized this opportunity to wreak havoc and secretly capture many cultivators as a method to increase its cultivation. I stopped you because I don't want you to stir up any more trouble. Hurry up and go around this region." Yang Fanshan's complexion changed, but before he could speak, Little Meaty's voice sounded out from within the carriage. "Ignore her and continue on our way." He revealed an apologetic expression. Although he felt that the bamboo hat woman had good intentions, he clearly wouldn't go against Little Meaty's wishes. "Thank you, miss, for the reminder. We must hurry on our way. Farewell." He pulled on the reins, and the carriage made a half-turn before continuing onwards. The bamboo hat woman furrowed her eyebrows in annoyance. As she watched the carriage go far away, she recognized the two people driving it. She had seen them on Mount Duta before. Back then, she had given them some kind reminders. But now, not only did they not recognize her kindness, but they also didn't recognize her kindness. It didn't matter. If they wanted to die, that was their own business. The bamboo hat woman turned and walked away, but after taking just a few steps, she stopped, a look of helplessness on her face. After a long time, she sighed and slapped her forehead. "Nyo Dowdu, Nyo Dowdu. Didn't you just swear that you wouldn't meddle in other people's business for a month? What? Do you want to go back on your word now? You really don't have any prospects." After taking a few more steps, she stopped and sighed heavily. She turned around and chased after the carriage. For lives, it was one thing if she didn't encounter them, but if she were to watch them die, Nyo Dowdu felt that she wouldn't be able to sleep well for the next 6 months. This was the last time, definitely the last time. After that, he would not meddle in other people's business for 2 months. Nyo Dowdu trailed far behind the carriage after finding a way out of this embarrassing situation. Although he had never seen the great monster at the bottom of the river, he had heard that it was very powerful. If it was a head-on battle, she might not be a match for him. However, it shouldn't be difficult for her to intimidate him from afar. Inside the carriage, Little Meat snorted. Her expression didn't look too good. The kind-hearted little girl was like a little white flower exposed to the wind and rain. Who knew when, with a paw sound, she would snap. "Moreover, you're being too kind. Are you going somewhere else? Why does he keep staring at us? Or could it be that this girl's motive was not pure?" She glanced at Chinyu, her complexion becoming increasingly dignified. She lifted her hand and looked at Chinyu again. After a moment of hesitation, she lowered her hand and coldly snorted. Across from her, Chinyu, who had been cultivating with his eyes closed, suddenly felt a wave of discomfort. He opened his eyes. "What is it?" Little Meat sneered. "Attracting bees and butterflies." Facing her cold and stern eyes, Chinyu was instantly stunned. He thought to himself, just what was going on? Why was she talking about bees and butterflies? He rubbed his eyebrows and forced a smile. "For better or for worse, give me an explanation." Little Meat rolled her eyes. "Go and see for yourself." Chinyu held his breath, carefully sensing the outside world. How did he meet her again? Moreover, this aunt wearing a bamboo hat, mother, if his judgment wasn't wrong, was currently chasing behind their carriage. He glanced at Little Meat, who had a nose that wasn't a nose and a face that wasn't a face. Chinyu began to understand her meaning. "But this matter, I've been wronged. What is she doing?" Little Meat coldly sneered. "Being a good person. Then, if she isn't careful, she will fall into a dangerous situation and have young Master Chin save her. If one saving grace isn't enough, then she will save you a second time and a third time. At least she will be able to give you a reason to accept this great kindness. Since there is no way to repay it, she can only repay it with her body." Chinyu wryly smiled. What was going on? But at this time he looked up at the great river outside the carriage window and vaguely guessed what was going on. This bamboo hat girl, wasn't she being too kind? Chinyu couldn't understand. With her personality, how had she been able to live peacefully to this day? Cough. She's being kind. so it's not good to blame her. I'll just scare that fish monster in the river a bit, and then we can safely pass by." Little Meat humphed in agreement. Deep in her heart, she didn't want to see that girl appear in front of her again. So what if she was wearing a bamboo hat? This lady's eyesight is good. A little seductress like you, that can bring calamity to a nation, should wear a layer of black cloth over your head. No, your body should also be covered with black cloth, and 3 thick layers at that. Very well, Baiji had just left, and now this bamboo hat girl had arrived. Was there something wrong with Qin Yu's body? Should he try to change it a little? Little Meat rubbed her chin. Being stared at by her eyes, Qin Yu felt his heart skip a beat. He coughed and turned around, flicking his fingers. Rumble, rumble. A great wave instantly rose up in the great river. Amidst the roaring of the surging river water, it wasn't obvious at all. But as this great wave rose up, a giant black shadow at the bottom of the river suddenly froze. Its eyes were fierce and filled with hesitation. In the end, it chose to suppress its bloodthirsty desires and didn't recklessly attack. It hid itself at the bottom of the river, its eyes wide as it watched the carriage gradually fade away. The bamboo hat girl followed behind the carriage. Her body was tense and her complexion was dignified. Along the way, she always felt as if there was a blade on her back. It was as if she had been locked onto by some icy cold and vicious eyes that could explode out at any moment. But luckily the journey was smooth. They safely passed through the territory occupied by the great monster at the bottom of the river without any accidents. "Who?" The bamboo hat girl let out a long breath. A smile lit up her face. She thought that it must have been something that the old ancestor had given her that had frightened the great monster so much that it didn't dare to hurt anyone. She had saved another 4 lives. Thinking of this, the bamboo hat girl's smile became even brighter. As she looked at the distant carriage, she felt incomparably happy. It was so comfortable to be a good person. The bamboo hat girl turned and walked away. As the saying went, when things were done, one would brush away one's achievements and fame. Something like gratitude wasn't something that chivalrous people like her cared about. You can leave like this without knowing anything. Who told me to be such a beautiful young girl who does good deeds without asking for anything in return? The bamboo hat girl blushed a little. She looked around and then relaxed. Speaking such words was indeed a bit shameful. She had no idea how the old ancestor had trained to speak such words with such confidence and confidence. As she thought in terms of cultivating the human heart, she was still far from being able to do so. Within the carriage, Qin Yu's lips twitched. Although the bamboo hat girl's voice was low to him and Meaty, since they were paying attention, it was no different from whispering in their ears. She really was a kind and interesting girl. Qin Yu glanced at the expressionless Meaty across from him and faintly smiled. Since there's nothing else, I will continue cultivating. But soon, Qin Yu discovered that things weren't so simple. As the carriage continued forwards, it soon encountered a group of cultivators. They were all filled with anger, and a cold chill rose up from their bodies. Seeing Yang Fan's Han and the old exalted elder driving the carriage, a person flew out from the opposite side. He landed on the ground and cupped his hands together. "Fellow Taoists, please." Yang Fan's Han cupped his hands together in return. "May I ask why you have stopped us?" This person wore blue robes and had a dignified expression. "Fellow Taoists, we came here today because we were summoned by Limitless Monastery's lesser, Limitless Sage. We must go to the 1,000-faced Blue Corridor River and find that fish monster that slaughters cultivators. We must seek justice for our fellow Taoists that died in vain." His eyes shined and his words were earnest. "Fellow Taoists, have you all been disturbed by the fish monster? That is because not too long ago, a family of 4 cultivators was abducted by the fish monster. It must have eaten its fill and wasn't in the mood to hunt, thus allowing you all to escape calamity. Since we have met today, how about the 4 of you come with us to the Blue Corridor River? With Limitless Monastery's lesser, Limitless Sage standing guard, It will be more than enough to execute that great monster. If news of this spreads out in the future, it will be a great reputation." Yang Fanshan waited for a moment. The carriage was silent, and he revealed an apologetic expression. He cupped his hands together and said, "My apologies, we have important matters to attend to, so it is inconvenient for us to stay here any longer." The blue-robed cultivator furrowed his eyebrows. "Right now, because of great General Zhao Yuan's perverse actions within Jade Gate Pass, we outside cultivators should sincerely cooperate with him. If you are so indifferent if you encounter a calamity in the future, I fear others will just stand by and watch." The group of people on the other side all looked down, dissatisfied, and even trying to persuade him. Yang Fanshan's face flushed red. He firmly shook his head. "My apologies. That's enough. Those who walk different paths cannot make plans together. But this poor Taoist can see that the two of you and the people in the carriage are not locals of Jade Gate Pass. In the future, it is best to be a bit more careful lest you fall into great General Zhao Yuan's hands. If that happens, even the heavens won't respond." In the crowd, an indifferent middle-aged Taoist, holding a horsetail whisk, slowly spoke up. The words "enlightened expert" were written all over his face. The blue-robed cultivator coldly snorted. He flicked his sleeves and left. The carriage passed by the group of people and continued onwards. Qin Yu thought for a moment. He asked, "Is he really a cultivator from Limitless Monastery?" If this was his style, then he didn't think Baiji should go. Midi shook her head. Qin Yu understood. So this was a fake. Looking at the prestige of Limitless Monastery, this so-called lesser, limitless sage's courage wasn't small. He took such a great risk just to gather a group of people and be praised by them, to enjoy the wonderful feeling of being surrounded. Even an idiot would know this wasn't true. There had to be some inside story behind this. But these weren't things he needed to consider. The carriage continued onwards. Moments later, Midi suddenly asked, "Young Master Qin, are you really not going to be a good person?" Qin Yu didn't open his eyes. "I already saved her once on Mount Duta." Midi humphed twice. She looked him up and down, as if she wanted to see what he was feeling from his subtle expressions. But she didn't find anything. Or perhaps she didn't sense anything wrong. Midi took a deep breath and said, "Go. Save that little girl. This time, don't hide your head and show your tail." Qin Yu opened his eyes, surprise on his face. Midi reached out a hand and gestured as if she were holding a chess piece in her hand. Qin Yu reacted. Although this sort of purposeful action felt a bit strange, he still had to save her. Otherwise, if good people really didn't live long, then who in this world would still meddle in other people's business? That sort of world was far too boring. "I understand." He lifted a hand and knocked on the carriage. The carriage stopped. Qin Yu pushed open the door and walked out. He said to Yang Fanshan and the old exalted, "I have some matters to attend to. You can continue on your way." He turned and left. After several flashes, his figure vanished from sight. Chapter 1670. There was a secret that Niu Daodu had never told anyone. It was that she was a little timid. So, when she saw such a large group of people coming at her aggressively, Niu Daoda's first thought was to quickly hide. She was even less interested in joining forces to kill the demon. She had never heard of the immeasurable temple's little infinity perfected being, so he wasn't that powerful. But the great demon hiding in the Longtsang River was really powerful. She didn't want to run over and send warmth to it. But soon, Niu Daodu was filled with righteous indignation. She forgot about her timid nature and widened her eyes, gritting her teeth. How could there be such an evil demon in this world? It captured a family of 4 and ate their parents in front of them. It even deliberately kept the 2 siblings alive to torture them into despair so that they would taste better when they ate it. Niu Daodu immediately decided that she would save the pitiful siblings. She couldn't let them die so miserably and helplessly in the mouth of the great demon. As for what she said before about not meddling in other people's business for 2 months, She had already thrown it to the side of the sky. I, Nyo Daodu, will punish evil and promote good. I will be a beautiful warrior that warms the world and fights against all evil. Moreover, although my cultivation is a little weak, according to the old ancestor, it's not worth mentioning. So, when I fight, the best way is to use a treasure to smash the opponent. But this time, in order to avoid being found quickly, Nyo Daodu deliberately didn't take the treasure pouch that the old ancestor gave her. Now, all she had on her were some small objects that were usually inconspicuous, but they should be of some use. Just now, she was frightened by the fish demon in the water. In the crowd, the little infinity perfected being glanced at the jade hairpin that Nyo Daodu was holding tightly in her hand. His expression changed slightly, and then a trace of heat appeared in his eyes. Of course, it was just a flash. Before Nyo Daodu could sense that something was wrong, she turned her head and saw this expert smiling and nodding. This time, with this young lady joining our team, our chances of success have increased by a bit. If everyone in the world is as chivalrous as you are, there's no need to worry about the injustice of the world. The green-robed cultivator nodded in admiration. That's right. He then frowned and revealed a look of disdain, just like those people who drove the carriage past just now. They only know how to protect themselves. If everyone in the world was like that, how low would the world fall? How despicable! Nyo Daodu asked a few questions and bit her lips. So they were such people. If she had known earlier, she wouldn't have helped them. The azure-robed cultivator observed her expression. Miss, you know them? Nyo Daodu hesitated for a moment. She was too embarrassed to talk about her feat. I've met him twice before, but I'm not familiar with him at all. The green-robed cultivator reminded seriously, since we have seen the true face of such a person, it is better to stay as far away from them as possible. Nyo Daodu nodded listlessly. In the distance, with his back against a large tree, Qin Yu's lips twitched. He couldn't help but wonder just how this bamboo hat girl had managed to survive to this day with her level of skill. No matter how he looked at it, he didn't think he was a character that would last more than 3 episodes. Just now, that perfected being Lesser Wuji's eyeballs had almost poked into his face, and he hadn't even noticed it? His heart was also tired. Qin Yu rubbed between his eyebrows. He stood up and followed, although he could directly take her away right now, and that perfected being Lesser Wuji wouldn't dare to say a single word. What he feared was that this bamboo hat girl wouldn't appreciate his kindness and would become increasingly disappointed in him. Then she would stubbornly run off to her death. Whatever. Since he had already made this trip, he would delay for a bit longer. Once she saw the true faces of these people around her, he would save her life. From a utilitarian perspective, saving someone's life and warning them to prevent danger from occurring were on 2 completely different levels. At the same time, he would take this opportunity to teach this bamboo hat girl a lesson. He would let her know that it was fine to be a good person, but at the very least, she had to be a bit more careful. After all, it wasn't like her luck would be so good every time. The fish monster at the bottom of Langsong River seemed to have sensed the arrival of the crowd. The turbulent river water instantly began to boil, rumbling and roaring without end. Perfected being Lesser Wuji didn't hesitate to step forward. With a solemn expression, he said, "Fellow Taoists, there is no need to be afraid. Fellow Taoists, there is no need to be afraid. This poor Taoist has a high-quality monster binding rope in my hands. I will make this great monster surrender and wait for death." As he spoke, there was a loud explosion in the river. A massive shadow broke through the waves, revealing the fierce appearance of a fish monster that was hundreds of feet long. What a good perfected being, Lesser Wuji. Facing the biting fish monster, he didn't feel any fear at all. With a loud shout, he flicked his sleeves and a shining golden rope howled out, wrapping around the fish monster. Roar! The fish monster angrily roared. But its body was bound by the monster binding rope. Over half of its aura was immediately reduced, and its massive body crashed into the water. Good. Perfected being, what fierce methods! With this monster binding rope in hand, there is nothing wrong with killing this monster today. Everyone, let's take advantage of its weakness. Let's attack together and slaughter this fish monster that slaughters the innocent. Perfected being Lesser Wuji stood in the wind, his robes fluttering in the wind. He truly displayed the elegance of a great master. Nyo Daodu was a bit stunned. She felt that the grade of this monster binding rope wasn't too high. Although it looked dazzling, its aura was ordinary. Could it be a treasure that she couldn't clearly sense? According to the words of the old ancestor, this was a peak treasure. Killing a fish monster would be as easy as capturing it. After all, with a peak monster binding rope, as long as it wrapped around its target, the monster would instantly turn into a pool of blood. How could it struggle so vigorously? Nyo Daodu couldn't understand. But at this time, everyone was attacking. She thought for a moment and lifted the jade hairpin in her hands. A bolt of lightning exploded within the hairpin. The fish monster that was bound by the monster binding rope suddenly stiffened. It roared out loud, causing countless waves to surge in all directions. At the same time, a layer of blue water vapor covered its entire body. It clenched its teeth and roared inwardly. How could a little girl have such a precious thunder magic treasure in her hands? And the key point was that she had hidden it so well that it had nearly fallen into her trap. Hiding in the distance, Qin Yu's doubts were solved. No wonder Ruru had suddenly changed her mind and allowed him to make this trip. It was likely that she had felt the aura of this jade hairpin. The so-called chess piece was more accurately the person behind the bamboo hat girl. This jade hairpin that contained the thunder magic was the best evidence, and he didn't seem to need to save her anymore. The aura that the jade hairpin revealed was less than 30% of its full strength. In Qin Yu's perception, the might of the thunder magic contained within was also ridiculously powerful. As long as he brought it out, it would be more than enough to turn this fish monster at the bottom of the river into charcoal. He didn't even need to worry about its aim. Who told it to hide at the bottom of the river, where water flowed? Thunder magic was its greatest nemesis. But what happened next caused Qin Yu's lips to twitch. He looked at the bamboo hat girl from afar and subconsciously asked the third question of his soul. Just how did you manage to survive until now? Taoist Lesser, Limitless shouted out loud, "This is bad. This fish monster has another hidden card. Does anyone have a thunder magic treasure? Hurry and lend it to me. Otherwise it will be too late." Nyo Daodu! The moment she lifted her head, the eyes of the people around her fell on her. After all, the jade hairpin in her hand was sparkling with lightning. It was obvious that it wasn't an ordinary item. Some were surprised, some were happy, but most of them were hinting and persuading. A rough interpretation would be, "What are you spacing out for?" It was better to hurry up and hand over the thunder magic treasure in his hand to the enlightened person. Nyo Daodu felt that something was wrong. However, with so many people staring at her and urging her with their gazes, she could not help feeling flustered. He panicked, and his cowardice was completely exposed. Without knowing what was going on, he handed over the jade hairpin. Qin Yu covered his face with his hands and let out a long sigh. Taoist Master Everlasting, who was holding the jade hairpin, revealed a look of joy. He laughed and said, "Thank you, miss. Once I kill the demon, I will return it to its owner." He took a step forward and directly charged into the river. "Die, evil creature!" On the riverbank, everyone watched as the spiritual master displayed his divine might and jumped into the river. Everyone's eyes widened. "Let's go! We will follow you into the river to kill the demon." It was unknown who shouted, but everyone held out. Like dumplings being thrown into a pot, they all jumped into the river. Among them was the dazed Nyo Daodu, who hadn't yet regained her composure. It was only when the water-repelling magic treasure on her body automatically activated and formed a barrier around her that she regained her composure. Her eyes widened. It was unknown what Nyo Daodu had sensed. She wanted to run away, but it was already too late. Bang! The river water instantly thickened. It was like an entire mountain of water was pressing down on top of everyone's heads, imprisoning them deep within the water and making it impossible for them to move. A loud roar exploded from beneath the water. "Damned foreign cultivators, you dare to attack my residence? You deserve to die." They saw that the water monster from before was now wearing a suit of blue-black armor. It swam up from beneath the water, its giant eyes stubbornly staring at the crowd. As for the monster binding rope that was wrapped around its body, it had long since disappeared. As for Taoist Master Everlasting, who had rushed in first, he was nowhere to be seen. All of the excited cultivators who were immersed in the excitement of killing a great monster suddenly paled. No one knew who was a fool. Seeing this, even the slowest person could feel that something was wrong. Taoist Master Everlasting had vanished from sight, and this fish monster in front of them was actually wearing the armor of the great Qin Empire and had even called himself a general. Panic and panic surged out from the depths of everyone's hearts. Their complexions immediately paled. The fish monster's eyes were cruel and cruel, but deep within they were filled with satisfaction. This bunch of idiots had delivered themselves to its doorstep. Today, even if it killed all of them, there wouldn't be any trouble. This was because they were the ones who tried to attack the underwater palace first. And as a monster general that had already submitted to the Jade Gate Pass, according to great General Zhao Yuan's rules, no one could pursue this matter after the fact. Thinking of this, the fish monster's eyes became even more cruel and bloodthirsty. In truth, after relying on the Jade Gate Pass for these past years and becoming the local overlord of this river, the fish monster had lived a comfortable life. If it weren't for the fact that it had reached a bottleneck in its cultivation and needed to swallow the flesh and blood of other cultivators in order to make a breakthrough, it wouldn't have taken such a risk. If a monster general in the army swallowed cultivators, once this matter spread out, it would die without a doubt. It was only because great General Zhao Yuan had stirred up waves that it dared to act in secret. But in these past days, the commotion had been too great. Thus, the fish monster had come up with a plan to deliberately spare the siblings and send people out to guide them. This was how it had obtained today's harvest. As a fish monster that wasn't known for its intelligence, for it to be able to come up with such a flawless plan, it was simply perfect. As for the so-called Taoist Master Everlasting, amongst human cultivators, there had never been a lack of cowards that feared death. If it was used well, it would be successful in every endeavor. True priceless advice. The fish monster licked its lips. Drool constantly gushed out and was instantly washed away by the river. Looking at the group of cultivators in front of it, it felt a burning hunger in its stomach. Who should it eat first? Its eyes turned and fell on Niu Daodu. The reason was simple. Of all the cultivators in front of it, only this little girl could make it feel threatened. If it wanted to eat someone, it would naturally be her. Moreover, the girls of human cultivators were all fair and tender. Their mouths were exquisite and the taste was endless. Hiss! Saliva flowed out. The fish monster swung its tail and swam over to Niu Daodu. Its target was obvious. The surrounding cultivators all revealed looks of horror as they struggled to retreat to the side. Niu Daodu, who discovered that she was the only one left in her original spot, turned pale under the bamboo hat. What happened to slaying the monster together? Why did they all run away now? No, at a time like this, I shouldn't continue thinking about these things. Otherwise, I'll really die. But what should I do? I can't defeat the fish monster. Its teeth are too long and look very sharp. Will I bleed? Definitely. Moreover, I might be bitten into two and then chewed and eaten. Woo 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 woo. This old ancestor is so scared.